Chapter 796. Ever since the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace became the director of the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office of the Sword Committee headquarters 3 years ago, the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace had begun to play with the so-called blood circulation policy. He encouraged more sword bearers to go to the Shanghai Pass to gain experience. As a result, in just 3 years, the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace had assigned more than 480 sword bearers to the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office. Less than 100 sword bearers were assigned by the other 8 base cities. It was said that not many of the famed sword-level swordbearers were still alive. Many families had received death notices. These famed sword-level swordbearers had sacrificed their precious lives for the great cause of mankind. Later on, the sword-bearers of the Gui Palace had found some clues. It turned out that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was eccentric. Anyone who had offended him would be recorded in a black silk notebook and sent to the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office, regardless of whether they were talented or not. The Black Hall's Sword Spirit's notebook was a tool that the Sword Spirit used to retaliate. What was more terrifying was that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was backed by Long Shijiendi. As long as Long Shijiendi was alive, nobody would dare to question the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace. Therefore, most of the sword bearers of the Gui Palace were afraid of the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace. What was more infuriating was that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace liked to wander around the world. From time to time, he would appear in a base city and send a batch of sword bearers of the Gui Palace to the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office, which was terrifying. All the sword bearers of the Gui Palace would stay far away from him. If they heard that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace had appeared in their city, they would immediately lock themselves up at home or simply leave the city to take the risk. In short, they didn't want to wander around on the streets in case they bumped into this jinx and were sent to the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office. Some people might ask why the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace didn't gather all the sword bearers of the Gui Palace to complain to the Sword Committee headquarters if he was so outrageous. Even Long Shijiendi wouldn't dare to do anything to the public in the face of all the sword bearers of the Gui Palace. If the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was a weak and incompetent sword-bearer like Haotian Jiendi's son, the public would be indignant. However, the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was a fierce man who had fought his way back from the Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office. Originally, every sword wielder was allowed to guard the mountain pass for 3 years. However, after the Gui Hall Sword Spirit became a famed sword wielder, he took the initiative to apply to enter the mountain pass and stayed there for 7 years. It wasn't as if someone was purposely forcing him to stay there. Spirit of the sword bearers of the Sword Spirit had to stay in the dispatching office for 3 years. It was only when the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace had accumulated too much sword essence in his body that he had no choice but to come out and synchronize with the Sword Lady of the Spirit Sword Realm. Then, he hit the target with one strike and became a Spirit Sword Realm sword wielder. Only then did his fighting career in Shanghai Pass come to an end. It was said that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was guarding the most dangerous main star, the Myrtle Imperial Star. In the past 100 years, the main star, the Myrtle Imperial Star, had been attacked 172 times. On average, it had been attacked 7 times per year. Everyone knew how dangerous it was. During the 7 years that the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace had been guarding the Myrtle Imperial Star, the number of Wu people dying in the hands of the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace was in the hundreds. In the end, the sorcerer tribe, who were naturally belligerent, took the initiative to avoid the Myrtle Imperial Star, so the Sword Spirit of the Gui Temple did not have to fight for the last few months. Only then did the Sword Spirit of the Gui Temple make a trip to Yanjing City and become a Spirit Sword-level sword wielder. Therefore, the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace didn't get the position from the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace's Shanghai Pass Dispatching Office. Instead, he got the position from the Sword Spirit of the Gui Palace. Without solid evidence to prove that the sword spirit of the Gui Palace was using his black notebook to retaliate, the sword-bearers of the famous sword rank had no reason to complain about the sword spirit of the Gui Palace. Back to the main topic, when Gohan heard the sword spirit of the Gui Palace say, "Release the sunken dragon sparrow, kneel down and slap yourself 20 times. Then, apologize to the disciplinary committee and tell them that your sword lady attacked the sunken dragon sparrow first. Then, you and your sword lady will be confined for 3 years. If you do that, I will kick you out of my notebook." Gohan sneered when he said this. It seemed like the rumors were true. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace was indeed using his authority to retaliate. If you have the ability, you can release the sword lady yourself. Why bother me? Gohan sized up the sword spirit of the Gui Palace as he spoke. Although the sword spirit of Gui Palace had the word black in his name, his appearance wasn't black at all. On the contrary, he looked very fair with golden hair, a tall nose bridge, and pale skin. If it weren't for the fact that his pupils were black, it would be hard to believe that he had some Chinese blood in his bloodline. Very well. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace nodded and took out his black notebook. Then, he took out a fountain pen and asked, "What's your name? I don't need to trouble you." Gohan smiled and extended his hand. Before the sword spirit of the Gui Palace could react, the black notebook was already in Gohan's hand. The crowd was dumbfounded. What did they just see? Someone actually snatched the black notebook from the sword spirit of the Gui Palace? The sky was falling and the ground was collapsing. This fellow was dead meat. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace would definitely send him to the area with the highest mortality rate in the Shanhai Pass. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace didn't say anything. He just looked at the black notebook that was snatched away. No one knew what he was thinking. However, Gohan didn't think that snatching the sword spirit's notebook was a big deal. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace wasn't a sword master. Without the protection of the sword lady, he was only slightly stronger than an ordinary sword bearer. Otherwise, Gohan wouldn't have been able to snatch the sword spirit's notebook so easily. What does the sword bearer want to do by snatching the sword spirit's black notebook? A crowd asked curiously. I wonder if he wants to destroy the black notebook. That way, the sword spirit of Gui Hall won't be able to do anything to him, one of the onlookers guessed. The black notebook isn't important. How can a notebook that costs 1 yuan not be bought? What's important is that the sword spirit of the Gui Palace probably remembers this sword bearer very well. This fella can't escape from the Shanhai Pass, someone else said. However, he immediately smiled happily. However, this is good news. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace might not remember all the names in the black notebook. If that's the case, the other sword bearers who have their names in the notebook might have a chance to survive. I'm going to tell my brother-in-law. A few days ago, the sword spirit of the Gui Palace recorded his name in the notebook. He's spending his last moments with his family. I'm going to tell him the good news immediately. Unfortunately, the onlooker could not tell his brother-in-law about the good news. This was because Gohan did not destroy the black notebook after snatching it. Instead, he took out a fountain pen and wrote a string of words on the black notebook. Here. I don't need someone to write my name for me. Gohan threw the black notebook back to the sword spirit after he was done writing. So you're Gohan from Yuzhong City. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace glanced at the words on the notebook. You can't escape the fate of going to the Shanhai Pass anyway. It doesn't matter if I write it or not. After saying that, the sword chi in the sword spirit's hand suddenly exploded. The black notebook that had terrified countless people turned into black powder. I don't like people writing on my things either, the sword spirit of the Gui Palace said expressionlessly. The sword spirit of the Gui Palace said expressionlessly. He then patted the deep-water dragon sparrow's body, and the deep-water dragon sparrow turned into a ray of light and returned to the sword spirit of the Gui Palace's hand. This was a good way to break the solid frost's lock. All they had to do was turn the Sword Maiden back into her sword form. Even if the solid frost sword aura was 100 times stronger, it still wouldn't be able to stop the Sword Maiden from turning back into her sword form. We'll meet again. The sword spirit of the Guay Palace was about to leave Gohan's room with the deepwater dragon Sparrow. It seemed like he had no intention of tangling with Gohan any longer. Logically speaking, Gohan should feel lucky. After all, Gohan hated trouble. It would not do him any good to get entangled in this matter. However, Gohan did not do that. It seemed like Gohan did not want to let the sword spirit of the Guay Palace go just like that. When the sword spirit took a step forward, Gohan suddenly said, "Your deepwater dragon Sparrow attacked my heavenly sword. Are you going to just let it go? Shouldn't you give me an explanation?" "What explanation do you want?" the sword spirit asked without turning around to face Gohan. "Let's have a duel. I want to personally teach the deepwater dragon Sparrow how to be a sword lady and the sisterhood treaty." Gohan actually took the initiative to issue an absolute invitation to the sword spirit of the Guay Palace. This was the first time Gohan had issued an invitation to a duel in the real world. "I refuse," the sword spirit of the Guay Palace said before disappearing from Gohan's room. The sword spirit of the Guay Palace actually refused the duel? How could he refuse such a challenge? The onlookers discussed among themselves when they saw this scene. They could not understand the sword spirit's refusal. In their opinion, the sword spirit of the Guay Palace was a proud and arrogant crown prince of the sword Dharch, so he should respond to any insult. Therefore, he shouldn't be a coward and refuse the challenge of a duel. However, the sword spirit of the Guay Palace had actually rejected the duel without hesitation. Why did it feel so unreal? No matter what, Gohan could already imagine that what had just happened would definitely become big news. It would become a hot topic in Swallow Capital City. He reckoned that everyone would be talking about him and the sword spirit of the Guay Palace for the next 3 days. Boring. Gohan shook his head and closed the door to his room. He then returned to his room to sleep. He did not cover Chinpin with a blanket when he left. He wondered if Chinpin had caught a cold. When did this silly fellow learn to sleep naked? Chapter 797. Actually, when the quarrel started this morning, Gohan should have walked out of his room. However, when Gohan opened his eyes, he helplessly realized that Chinpin, who was in his arms, had taken off all his clothes. His naked body was stuck in Gohan's arms, and he sniffed from time to time as if he had caught a cold. Sword maidens naturally wouldn't catch a cold, but it wasn't a good habit to sleep naked. Therefore, Gohan helped Chinpin put on his clothes before he came out of the room. However, he didn't expect to see Etion facing the attack of the water dragon Sparrow, which led to the following scene. Gohan directly went back to his room to educate Chinpin, and help Chinpin get rid of his bad habit of sleeping naked. On the other side, the rest of the sword maidens had surrounded Etion, leaving her no space to move. What did the water dragon Sparrow mean? Chidien asked with concern. Yes. What's going on inside? Doyu chimed in. Etion, we are all good sisters. Tell us what happened, and we will help you kill her. There are 6 of us. In the future, there might be 12 more people. I think we should form a football team. Shui accidentally changed the topic. I didn't say anything and just stared at Etion. Juzi also stared at Etion with her big, curious eyes. She really wanted to force Etion to her death. What made Etion even more unlucky was that Juzi and Chidien, these 2 perverts, were blocking her way. She didn't even have the chance to escape. Goodbye. Etion stuck out her tongue at everyone, then turned into a ray of light and flew into Gohan's room. This guy actually escaped by returning to his sword. What spread the fastest in this world? Of course, gossip spread the fastest. In just one morning, almost half of the sword bearers in Yanjing City had received the latest news. The sword spirit of Gui Palace had completely fallen out with Guhan, the former sword pavilion master from Yuzhong City. This guy was destined to be sent to the Shanhai Pass by the sword spirit of Gui Palace. It was estimated that he would be sent to the most dangerous place. Only God knew if he could survive. However, everyone's focus was not on Guhan, but on the black notebook of the sword spirit of Gui Palace. It was said that the black notebook had been destroyed by the Gui Palace sword spirit himself. Many famed sword-rank swordbearers were grateful and felt that they had escaped a disaster. However, they didn't know that the sword spirit of the Gui Hall had bought a small notebook from a stationery store by the roadside after leaving the Su Sanduo super luxurious hotel. The news quickly spread to Yuzhong City and reached Lu Lei's ears. When Guhan was teaching Qinpin not to sleep naked, Lu Lei's phone call came. "What's the matter with you? How did you offend the sword spirit of Gui Palace?" Lu Lei's voice was full of anger. Obviously, he was very dissatisfied with Guhan for offending such a person. "It's not a big deal, master. It's fine if I offend him. I've been on the watch list of the sword committee for a long time. Sooner or later, I'll have to go to the Shanhai Pass. This is something I can't escape from. Why should I be afraid of his lousy notebook?" Guhan said calmly. "What do you know? Even if you have to go to the Shanhai Pass, there's still a difference between leaving earlier and leaving later." Lu Lei coughed twice angrily. "With my old bones, I can at least let you live outside for another year, so that you can accumulate more sword essence. Then, you will have a higher chance of surviving in Shanhai Pass. Do you understand? That's not much of a difference. The last group of people who went to Shanhai Pass haven't even left for a month, so the next group will take at least 4 to 5 months. This amount of time is enough for me. Who knows, maybe my disciple will directly become a spirit sword-level sword holder," Guhan said indifferently. Do you think you still have 4 to 5 months? Lu Lei was so angry that he laughed. "Let me tell you, the next batch of people will be replenished in the Shanhai Pass next month. With the temper of the sword spirit of the Gui Hall, you will definitely be in the next batch of people. Just wait to go to the Shanhai Pass next month." How could this be? Guhan's hand trembled. He felt that it was somewhat unbelievable. According to the rules, doesn't the Shanhai Pass replenish people every 6 months? There has never been such a rule in the Shanhai Pass. It's just an unspoken rule. Lu Lei's voice suddenly became weaker. "I just received the news. Yesterday, the Zhurong tribe, Xianming tribe, and the other 4 tribes in the Shanhai Pass suddenly launched an attack on the 4 main stars, Taiwei Imperial Star, Ziwei Imperial Star, Donggong Azure Dragon Star, and Beigong Black Tortoise Star. The guardian sword-bearers of Taiwei Imperial Star and Donggong Azure Dragon Star have been sacrificed. All the Zhoutian star time banners of these 2 main stars have lost their effect. Only the sword-bearers of Ziwei Imperial Star and Beigong Black Tortoise Star are still struggling. How could such a terrible thing happen?" Guhan's expression immediately turned ugly. It was not because he was about to go to the Shanhai Pass, but because he was deeply worried about the situation in the Shanhai Pass. As mentioned before, the most dangerous situation of the Zhoutian star battle formation was when 2 sword-bearers of the main stars died at the same time, causing the Zhoutian star time banners under the control of the 2 main stars to fall. If 3 main stars were to fall, it would mean that the Zhoutian star battle formation would completely collapse, and the 12 Zuwu would have to break out of the formation. Such a terrible situation had happened 4 times in the past. The most recent one was more than 90 years ago. It was a very long time ago. At that time, Gu Jinjiandi had only just become a sword-bearer of the treasure sword rank. To most people, this sentence was as absurd, strange, and unbelievable as hearing that the 8-nation alliance army had suddenly entered Beijing in the 21st century. "Master, what's the situation now? I can rush to the Shanhai Pass right now." Guhan could not let the 12 Zhu Wu escape from the Zhou Tian star battle formation, or the human race would face a catastrophe. As long as he could stop this from happening, Guhan could immediately rush to the Shanhai Pass fortress. He would be willing to sacrifice his life for it. Alright, you don't have to go. Fortunately, the famed sword bearers who were sent over last month are still handling the handover work with the famed sword bearers who are about to replace them. The Shanhai Pass fortress has exactly twice the usual strength. With their full support, the situation at Myrtle Imperial Star and Beigong Xuanwu has stabilized. The famed sword bearers guarding there are also very safe. The Wu people won't be able to break through it in a short period of time. You don't have to worry about this now. Lu Lei's words made Guhan heave a long sigh of relief. I understand now, Master. It must be because too many sword-bearers were lost during the battle, so the replacement sword-bearers had to return to guard the Zhou Tian Star Hour banner again. That's why we have to send the replacement sword-bearers over next month. Guhan said. It's not next month. After the battle, there are only a few kittens and puppies left in the Shanhai Pass fortress. There are also a lot of injured people frozen in the medical bay, ready to be sent back to be reborn. If the Wu people launch another, even if it's on a smaller scale, I'm afraid the Shanhai Pass fortress won't be able to hold on. That's why they can't wait for us to send reinforcements over tomorrow. But how is that possible? How can it be done in less than a month from recruiting people to transporting them? That's why we can only pray that the Shanhai Pass fortress can hold on. Otherwise, we humans can only fight to the death in Yanjing City and have another battle with the 12 Zhu Wu, Lu Lei said hatefully. That won't happen. At the same time, the 8 Wu people's tribes still lost the battle. The Wu people must have suffered great losses. It's uncertain if they can launch another decent attack in the next month, let alone try to break through our home planet again. It won't be a problem for the Shanhai Pass fortress to hold on for another 3 months. They are just afraid and want to escape from Shanhai Pass as soon as possible. Guhan directly exposed the thoughts of the swordsmen in Shanhai Pass. No matter what they are thinking, we humans can't let anything happen to Shanhai Pass fortress. Therefore, the next batch of reinforcements must go to Shanhai Pass fortress next month. Wait, the Sword Committee sent me a document. Haha, okay, the next batch of reinforcements has been decided. Your name, Guhan, will be the first on the first row in Yuzhang City. What do you think? Aren't you very honored? Lu Lei sounded like he was joking, but in fact, he was full of anger. I'll take care of it, Master. You don't have to worry about this. After I go to Shanhai Pass Fortress, I might be able to bring decades of peace to Shanhai Pass, Guhan said coldly. Lu Lei didn't say anything because he suddenly realized that what Guhan said was not a boast. With Guhan's strength comparable to the swordsman of spirit sword level, after entering Shanhai Pass Fortress, it was uncertain whether it would be Guhan or those Wu people who would be unlucky. In the end, Lu Lei could only sigh very tiredly. I don't want to care about your affairs. Remember, you are the future of Yuzhang City. The heavy burden of Yuzhang City's future will fall on your shoulders sooner or later. You must live well for me, live until I die, and then take over Yuzhang City and all the people of Yuzhang City. Master, can I trust you? Master, rest assured, I won't let you down, Guhan said resolutely. Forget it, Master still has a lot of official business to deal with. That's it. With that, Lu Lei hung up the phone. Something doesn't feel right. After hanging up the phone with Lu Lei, Guhan suddenly stood up with a worried face. Such an expression was very unusual for Guhan, because in Guhan's view of life, worrying was meaningless. If one had the time to worry, it was better to think of a solution to the problem. But now, Guhan really began to worry. I don't know if Master can hold on until the day I come back from Shanhai Pass Fortress. Chapter 798. Not long after Guhan hung up on Lu Lei, someone hurriedly knocked on Guhan's door. When he opened the door, he saw Sword Spirit Tiger standing there with an anxious expression. Gohan, you have a lot of ideas. Hurry up and think of something. Ku-Rak-In is about to die. Yes, Ku-Rak-In was about to die. Moreover, he was going to die at the hands of a human. He was going to die at the muzzle of a human's gun. The reason for this was very simple. One of the sword-bearers had already died before Ku-Rak-In. This sword-bearer was Yen Jing City's Sword Tower's lord, Sword Immortal Tianhen. Everything happened in a hurry. There was no time for anyone to prepare. In the short span of 10 minutes, one of the 18 sword-bearers of the Divine Sword Tier had died. He died in a human base city. His death was worthless. It was said that Hao Tianjiendi spat out a mouthful of blood after hearing this news. His body, which was already in danger, became even more dangerous. The whole of Yanjing City was enveloped in an atmosphere of grief and indignation. Ku-Rak-In was the culprit that Yanjing City thought was responsible for. This was what happened. After Ku-Rak-In forcefully synchronized with Yu King Go Jianjian, Ku-Rak-In was locked up by the Discipline Commission. Of course, this crime would only put Ku-Rak-In in jail for about half a month. It wasn't a big deal. The real problem was Ku-Rak-In's daughter, Sha Sha. Yuan Ko's detection equipment couldn't detect her. However, she was definitely a lowly girl from Yuan Ko. Sha Sha was also very easy to deal with. It was said that Sword Immortal Tianhen personally decided to send Sha Sha to Yuan Ko's first laboratory. She would become a rare Yun-level Yuan Ko experimental subject. She would become a human test subject. Yuan Ko's first laboratory was a research department established during the Kanzu era. It was also the first research department established after the apocalypse. The main purpose of Yuan Ko's first laboratory was as its name implied. It was used to study Yuan Ko's characteristics, Yuan Ko's abilities, Yuan Ko's origins, and Yuan Ko's weaknesses. In short, this laboratory had to study everything related to Yuan Ko. They had to understand everything about Yuan Ko. During Kanzu's era, Yuan Ko's first research laboratory played an extremely important role. At that time, humans knew nothing about Yuan Ko. They hid in dimensional rifts and were invulnerable. Even nuclear bombs couldn't kill them. At one point, 90% of humans felt despair. There was even an organized army that lost the faith and confidence to resist. They put down their weapons and knelt on the ground motionlessly, allowing Yuan Ko to slaughter them. Then, due to the fact that many Yuan Ko were gods and demons in myths and legends, all sorts of strange religions emerged. Rumors of the end of the world spread. The greatest danger that the survivors faced was that they had lost the confidence to resist Yuan Ko. Even with the existence of the sword-bearers who could fight against Yuan Ko, it didn't change the despair of humans. Therefore, under Kanzu's leadership, the sword-bearers began to capture some living Yuan Ko captives and handed them over to the remaining scientists for research. Yuan Ko's first research laboratory was thus established. There was no doubt that Yuan Ko's first research laboratory had contributed to humanity. In the first 30 years of its establishment, they had continuously published various research reports on Yuan Ko, gradually explaining the origins of Yuan Ko to the survivors. They told everyone that Yuan Ko was not used by the gods to destroy the world. They were just existences from the imaginary world, things created by humans themselves. Such a discovery greatly strengthened the confidence of the survivors. When Kanzu led the sword-bearers to build Yanjing Bay City, the rest of the ordinary survivors also worked tirelessly day and night. Crazily carrying out all kinds of labor, giving the sword-bearers who fought with their lives a safe environment. The original Yanjing City was also built by these survivors with their own flesh and blood, brick by brick. Therefore, the contributions of Yuan Ko's first research laboratory could not go unnoticed. Although 1,000 years had passed, humans still did not relax their research on Yuan Ko. The original Yuan Ko's first research laboratory had also become larger and larger. It had dozens of sections, and thousands of researchers constantly carried out various research on Yuan-Ko. This way, the laboratory needed a large number of research materials, which were living Yuan-Ko. After all, a dead Yuan-Ko could not exist in the world. It would be sucked back by the dimensional vortex. The low-level Yuan-Ko was easier to deal with. After some tasks were issued in the mission center, there would be sword-bearers to capture the low-level Yuan-Ko. It did not take much time. The real trouble was the high-level Yuan-Ko, especially the dragon level and above Yuan-Ko. This level of Yuan-Ko basically had their own high intelligence. How could they be willing to become research materials for humans to study? Therefore, when these Yuan-Ko were faced with a hopeless situation, these Yuan-Ko would rather die than become human captives. Therefore, every nether level and meteor level Yuan-Ko was the most valuable asset of Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. Not to mention the terrifying universe level Yuan-Ko, which was equivalent to a sword immortal level sword-bearer. On average, the Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory could not obtain a single universe-level Yuan-Ko experimental material in 100 years. Therefore, the moment Sha-Sha's identity was confirmed, she was taken away by Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. As for how Sha-Sha was treated in Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory, it was hard to describe. In previous novels, people liked to use lab rats to scare the main characters who had superpowers, so that they could hide their identities and abilities, so that they wouldn't be captured for research. Let me think of a more refreshing and refined metaphor here. Sasha was like the plasticine in the hands of a naughty child, who could be kneaded and deformed in any way they wanted. In less than half a month, the plasticine would disappear, and then she would beg her mother to buy her a new set of plasticine, which was basically a good state. Anyway, Sha-Sha was treated inhumanely in Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. There was nothing strange about this. Yuan-Ko was not a human, so there was no need to think about humanitarianism. In this era, there were no extreme animal protectionists who would rather have animals than their mothers. If there really was such a person, they would be beaten to death. However, this matter was somehow known by Ku-Rak-in. Theoretically speaking, Ku-Rak-in was locked up in the Discipline Commission's prison. Even if he knew, there was nothing he could do. However, Ku-Rak-in was cruel to himself. He actually cut off one of his arms with a sword, forcing the Discipline Commission to send him to the hospital to regrow his limbs. Then, Ku-Rak-in took the opportunity to escape from the hospital and rushed to Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory to save Sha-Sha. Hearing this, Gohan had to admit that Ku-Rak-in, who almost made him a cuckold, had a real man's side. He was a real man. Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory had always been guarded against Yuan-Ko's escape. They never thought that a swordsman from the outside would come in. Therefore, Ku-Rak-in, a new famed sword-rank swordsman, actually broke through the defenses of Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. He killed his way to the research laboratory where Sha-Sha was locked up and rescued her. Then, Sword Immortal Tianhen, who was closest to Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory, was the first to receive the call for help from Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. He stood in front of Ku-Rak-in and Sha-Sha. The Howling Tiger Sword Spirit was not clear about the specifics of the battle. The higher-ups of Yanjing City seemed to be deliberately avoiding this, not telling outsiders at all. The Howling Tiger Sword Spirit only knew that in less than 10 minutes, Sword Immortal Tianhen was dead. Sha-Sha had disappeared for some reason. Only Ku-Rak-in was captured alive in Yuan-Ko's first research laboratory. Naturally, Ku-Rak-in became the best punching bag for Yanjing City. Apart from Hao Tianjiendi, who did not say anything, the higher-ups of Yanjing City's swordsmen all said in unison that they wanted to kill Ku-Rak-in. He was a bastard who had killed a human immortal sword-rank swordsman for the sake of Yuan-Ko. It was said that the Commission for Discipline Inspection skipped the trial and even drafted the verdict. On the 7th day of Sword Immortal Tian-hen's death, they wanted to kill Ku-Rakin to avenge Sword Immortal Tian-hen. The Howling Tiger Sword Spirit, who was usually quite steady, had no idea what to do. He could only look for Gohan, hoping to discuss an idea with him. "Does Master know about this?" Gohan asked after a moment of thought. "Of course he knows. How could I dare to hide something like this from Yuzhong City? I reported this to the higher-ups last night." The Howling Tiger Sword Spirit nodded, then said, "However, this matter is only known to a few spirit sword rank and above swordsmen in Yanjing City. The others are still in a state of strict lockdown. It is said that Yanjing City does not know how to announce this news. They are afraid that if the truth is revealed, it will cause Yanjing City and Yuzhong City to completely oppose each other. Who knows, the hatred between the two cities will deepen. At that time, the bloodline of Yen and Huang will become the greatest enemy." "I didn't expect the people of Yanjing City to be so sensible." Gohan was a little surprised. Under normal circumstances in this kind of situation, shouldn't they immediately start a demonstration and smash things up? If it was two countries, it would be normal to directly declare war. At this time, Yanjing City could actually consider the problem from the perspective of human harmony and suppress the matter. The people of Yanjing City really could not be underestimated. In fact, Gohan was measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a petty person. In 1,000 years, even if they were blood brothers, Yanjing City and Yuzhong City would still be full of all kinds of friction. It was not that there was no friction greater than the death of an immortal sword-rank swordsman. Although in the end, Yuzhong City and Yanjing City called each other country bumpkins and antiques, in reality, they had supported each other to come this far. However, in reality they had helped each other along the way. Both sides had a set of well-understood rules for dealing with crises. It was also this rule that allowed the 8 human base cities to coexist peacefully for hundreds of years. The most important thing now is our attitude. The Howling Tiger Sword Spirit made a final conclusion. Regarding Ku-Rakin's attitude, should we save his life? Chapter 799. Should they save Ku-Rakin? This was a question worth considering. After all, he was from Yuzhong City, and he was Zhu Wudao's only son. If Ku-Rakin died, Zhu Wudao's bloodline would be completely cut off. This was unacceptable to the Roaring Tiger Sword Spirit and the other sword-bearers of Yuzhong City. After all, Zhu Wudao had died to save the entire Yuzhong City. No one in Yuzhong City would be able to feel at ease if they watched his only son die. Taking a step back, even if Ku-Rakin died, he should have died in the hands of Yuzhong City. However, it was almost impossible to save him. Now, all the high-level sword-bearers of Yanjing City were in a state of anger. Unless Gohan planned to kill his way through Yanjing City, how could he save Ku-Rakin? "Let's talk reason," Gohan said to the Roaring Tiger Sword Spirit after thinking for a while. "Reason? What does this have to do with saving Ku-Rakin?" The Roaring Tiger Sword Spirit was a little confused. "Of course we have to talk reason. Otherwise, do we still want to use force?" Gohan curled his lips. "Whether we save him or not depends on whether we can talk reason with him or not. If we talk reason with him, even if Yanjing City is unwilling, they have to let him go. If we don't talk reason with him, even if we both become Jiandi, we can't take Ku-Rakin away by force. Otherwise, we will be the sinners who destroyed the harmony between Yuzhong City and Yanjing City." "I understand." The Roaring Tiger Sword Spirit nodded, then looked at Gohan with hopeful eyes. "Comrade Gohan, you have the most ideas. Think about how we should talk reason with him. The most important thing to talk reason with him is to figure out the whole thing. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will always be victorious. If we don't even know what happened at that time, how can we reason with them?" Gohan said calmly. "I've tried my best, but I've only managed to get this bit of information. No one is willing to tell me what happened at the scene. The Yanjing City Sword Committee didn't even report the incident to the Sword Committee headquarters. I can't get any information from the Sword Committee headquarters. Now, I'm completely in the dark. The Tiger Roar Sword Spirit said in distress. That's nothing. Even if you heard the news, it wouldn't matter. Gohan shook his head. The information you obtained must have been passed through several mouths and ears. It must have been processed by different disseminators, so it's impossible for it to be exactly the same as the truth. Even if you obtained the information, it wouldn't be of much use. We have to find a way to get the most accurate information from the mouths of the people who witnessed the whole situation. Comrade Gohan, are you saying that I should ask Ku Rakin directly? The Tiger Roar Sword Spirit scratched its head. That's even more difficult, okay? I don't even know where Ku Rakin is. How am I supposed to ask him? If you don't know where he is, just ask him. Gohan smiled. Don't forget that Ku Rakin is still a participant in the Octagon tournament. According to the rules of the tournament, no one is allowed to place any restrictions on the participants of the Octagon tournament. Therefore, before the Discipline Commission for Discipline Inspection's verdict, we can openly ask the Yanjing City Sword Committee for Ku Rakin. Otherwise, even if this lawsuit is brought to the Sword Committee headquarters, our chances of winning will be higher. The day after tomorrow is the Octagon tournament. We can also openly ask Yanjing City to return our participants to us. If they don't, then they must give us concrete evidence to prove Ku Rakin's crimes and let us talk to Ku Rakin face to face. This is a very reasonable request, and Yanjing City has no reason to refuse. That being said, what if Yanjing City doesn't let us see Ku Rakin? Facing Sword Immortal Tianhen's situation, even if Yanjing City is unwilling, I'm afraid the Octagon Tournament's organizing committee won't stand up for us. The Tiger Roar Sword Spirit was clearly not as optimistic as Gohan. Leave this matter to me. I'll get Yanjing City's people to let us in. Although Gohan said it very straightforwardly, he felt a little helpless in his heart. He didn't want to get involved with Ku Rakin at all. This was related to the fact that Ku Rakin didn't possess the King of Yu's Gojian sword. Gohan didn't have any intention of retaliating. Instead, he felt that this would be very troublesome. If he didn't handle it well, it could cause a fatal crack in the relationship between Yuzhong City and Yanjing City. And most importantly, deep in Gohan's heart, he vaguely felt that Ku Rakin deserved to die. For the sake of a mere Yuan Ko, he actually caused the death of a human immortal sword-tier sword wielder. The impact of this matter was huge. The power of the human race had been greatly weakened. More importantly, Sword Immortal Tianhen was very young. Perhaps he could ascend to the throne in the future. Perhaps Ku Rakin had caused the death of a future human, Jiendi. Killing Ku Rakin's insignificant life was considered a light punishment. If this had happened in the Middle Ages before the Great Calamity, he would have been beheaded and his entire family would have been annihilated along with him. However, Gohan had to think of a way to save Ku Rakin's life. Just like what had been said before, Gu Wudao had sacrificed his life for Yuzhong City. Gohan didn't want to see Gu Wudao's bloodline end up in the end. Therefore, Gohan secretly decided that he had to find a way to find out the truth of the matter. He had to find out what role Ku Rakin had played in this matter, what he had done, and how much responsibility he had to pay for Sword Immortal Tianhen's death. If Sword Immortal Tianhen's death was indeed because of Ku Rakin's betrayal, then not only would Gohan not save Ku Rakin's life, but he would also step on him and send him on his way. That afternoon, Gohan brought Lu Shihua to the entrance of the Yanjing City Sword Committee and requested to meet with the chairman of the Yanjing City Sword Committee. The Yanjing City Sword Committee was very different from the Yuzhong City Sword Committee. At least in terms of architecture, the Yanjing City Sword Committee was a level higher than the Yuzhong City Sword Committee. The Yanjing City Sword Committee's building was called White Jade Capital. The entire building had no paint, tiles, cement, or any other building materials. all of the walls had the gentle color of top-grade white jade. When touched, it felt exactly like white jade. In fact, the entire building was carved out of a huge white jade stone the size of a mountain. It was said that Kinzu and Ksitigarbha had fought a great battle, and Ksitigarbha had been forced to flee underground. The two had fought tens of thousands of meters underground. Although Ksitigarbha had escaped in the end, Kinzu had unexpectedly discovered this huge white jade stone. When Kinzu ordered people to dig out this huge white jade stone, everyone was shocked. This was because this huge white jade stone was 1,000 meters tall and 1,000 meters wide. The entire stone shone with the color of white jade. After taking it to be tested, it was found to be pure jade with a purity of over 98%, with pitifully few impurities. Such a terrifying huge white jade stone could shock the entire world to death before the Great Apocalypse. If it was appraised, it would probably be sold for a few trillion RMB. Of course, it couldn't be sold. Instead, it would be kept as a national treasure by the government. However, after the Great Apocalypse, this huge white jade stone seemed a little redundant. Back then, humans couldn't even keep their lives, so they didn't have any interest in luxury items. This huge white jade stone was just a nice-looking stone. However, it would be a pity to just leave it outside. So, Kinzu had a brainstorm. He found a group of construction workers and engineers. After 3 years, they carved this huge white jade stone into a huge building. Kinzu named it White Jade Capital. It became the Yanjing city's office. After the Sword Committee was established, White Jade Capital became the Sword Committee's office building. It was also the most luxurious building in the world. Even the Yanjing Palace and the headquarters of the Sword Committee did not have a tenth of the grandeur of the White Jade Capital. Anyone who saw the building carved out of white jade would be on their knees and kneel in front of the uncanny workmanship of nature. However, Gohan and Lu Shihua didn't have much of a reaction when they saw White Jade Capital. That was because Gohan had seen it countless times on the internet. Gohan could even memorize all the data of White Jade Capital, so there was nothing to be surprised about. Lu Shihua, on the other hand, had seen too many of them. The first time she saw White Jade Capital, she couldn't help but want to kneel. However, after so many days, she had truly integrated into the position of Yuzhong City's Sword Pavilion Master. She kept going back and forth between the Sword Committee's headquarters and the Yanjing City Sword Committee's headquarters. No matter how magnificent it was, she was no longer curious about it. After they entered White Jade Capital, a staff member came to greet them. The staff member asked why the two sword-bearers were here. They were obviously not from Yanjing City. "I am Gohan, and she is Yuzhong City's Sword Pavilion Master, Lu Shihua. We want to see the chairman of the Yanjing Sword Committee, the Great Sun Sword Immortal," Gohan told the staff member. Although Yanjing City had the existence of Sword Emperor Haotian Sword Emperor, it seemed that in theory, the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee should belong to Haotian Sword Emperor. But since Kinzu, humans had developed a habit. Apart from Jiandi, who had founded the base city, Jiandi would not directly participate in the various government affairs of the base city. They would cultivate in their own palaces and improve their abilities. They would put all their energy into making themselves stronger and living longer. However, Jiandi could assign any position in the base city to anyone other than the Sword Pavilion Master. Therefore, the chairman or chairman of the Sword Committee would usually be appointed by Jiandi. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was appointed by Haotian Jiandi to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. He had the authority of Haotian Jiandi. In Yanjing City, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was second only to Jiandi. He was like a prime minister. The staff member was just an ordinary person. He did not know that a sword holder at the God's Sword Immortal had died in Yuzhong City. But he did know that Gohan had humiliated the sword spirit of the Gui Hall. Therefore, he was in awe of Gohan. Moreover, the Sword Pavilion Master of Yuzhong City was with him. Therefore, the staff member did not dare to delay. He immediately reported Gohan's request to the operator. In less than 10 seconds, the staff member received a reply. He began to lead Gohan to the special elevator at the back of the hall. It was impossible to see the Great Sun Sword Immortal by normal means. Only by going through the special elevator could he see the person who had the highest authority in Yanjing City. Chapter 800. Just like his name suggested, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was a very domineering man. He was also the only man that Gohan had ever seen that could compare to Cast Cloud Iron in terms of physique. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was over 2.3 meters tall, and his shoulders were almost double Gohan's. Standing next to the Great Sun Sword Immortal, Gohan and the Great Sun Sword Immortal looked like a $1 bill next to a $100 bill. Your Yuzhong City still has the face to send someone to see me. The Great Sun Sword Immortal's eyes were filled with anger the moment he saw Gohan. This was a man who was not good at hiding his emotions. This is not a matter of shame. There are some things that have to be dealt with. Is it because our Yuzhong City doesn't have the face to send people here that we will just ignore these things and not do anything to deal with them? Not communicate with Yanjing City at all? Aren't you going to do what we can to compensate Yanjing City? Gohan's retort unexpectedly made the Great Sun Sword Immortal's expression look much better. When there was a conflict between two parties, it was even worse to push the blame onto others. On the contrary, if they took the initiative to lower their stance and put on an attitude of resolving the problem, then the problem could be resolved better. Alright, then tell me, how do you want to resolve this matter? And how do you want to compensate us? The Great Sun Sword Immortal returned to his seat. The chair that the Great Sun Sword Immortal sat on was not some soft and comfortable sofa, but a hard jade chair. It had been carved when the white jade jing was being built. The chair itself was connected to the white jade jing, and could not be moved at all. Sitting on such a chair is a terrible experience. Everyone who goes to school or works in the office, put yourself in my shoes. If the chair under your buttocks is cold, you can only use your buttocks to adjust your posture, instead of changing the chair to a more comfortable sitting position. What a terrible experience that would be. However, there was only one chair in the entire white jade jing. It was an extension of the white jade jing's body. Only the chairman of the Sword Council had to sit in such an uncomfortable chair. This was a rule set by Kanzu in the past. It was to make his successors feel uncomfortable at all times so that they would not indulge in peace and forget the great cause of mankind. However, there was a rumor that the jade chair was the most important part of the white jade jing. It contained a treasure left behind by Kanzu. If anyone could break this chair, they would be able to obtain the treasure left behind by Kanzu. Of course, this was all nonsense, and Gohan had never taken it to heart. Of course, we have to first calculate what Beijing City has lost. Gohan laughed. The Great Sun Sword Immortal squinted his eyes and said in disdain, "That's easy. I won't hold you accountable for the losses of Yuan Ko's first research lab. All you have to do is return Tian Hen's life to us." What did he mean by returning Tian Hen's life? How could the life of a sword immortal be calculated with anything? The Great Sun Sword Immortal's meaning was clear. He wanted Ku Rock-in to pay with his life. Of course, we do have to calculate this clearly. Gohan smiled. But if you want Yuzhong City to compensate, you have to at least let us know how many mistakes Ku Rock-in made in this matter. How much responsibility does he have to bear? Don't you think so, Great Sun Sword Immortal? Of course he's 100% responsible. Are you trying to push his responsibility away? The Great Sun Sword Immortal's eyes widened, and it was as if a scorching ray of sunlight shone on Gohan's body, causing Gohan to feel a burning sensation that he had nowhere to hide. Even if he is 100% responsible, Yuzhong City still needs to figure out the process of this matter, doesn't it? Does Yuzhong City have to accept it just because Yanjing City says it's 100% responsible? That's against the rules. There's no such logic in the world. Guhan argued. Then I'll make it clear for you. The great sun sword immortal suddenly stood up from his chair. The huge difference in height allowed him to look down at Guhan. At the same time, his body released a powerful pressure. This was the pressure of a sword immortal. Guhan felt like he was tens of thousands of meters under the sea, and all the air around him was giving him a pressure of more than 10 times that of normal air pressure. This was a huge pressure both visually and psychologically. A normal sword wielder would have already knelt in the face of this pressure. But Guhan was neither humble nor arrogant. His body didn't even tremble, as if he couldn't feel this pressure at all. I know everything. Just ask me what you want to know. I will answer you. The great sun sword immortal said each word in an oppressive tone. What a joke. Isn't this just your side of the story? We, Yuzhong City, want to know the real truth. Guhan replied word by word. What I said is the truth. Do you dare to doubt the chairman of the Yanjing City Sword Committee? The moment he finished speaking, the pressure released by the great sun sword immortal suddenly increased by tenfold, which was equivalent to giving Guhan a pressure several hundred times that of normal atmospheric pressure. This was the pressure that a gasoline engine's cylinder had to withstand when the gasoline was fully ignited. If a normal person stayed in this environment, they would have long been crushed into a pile of meat paste. But the pressure of the sword immortal was not physical pressure. In reality, it was a kind of spiritual pressure, a pressure that was exerted on the Purple Palace. Guhan's body didn't actually bear any pressure. What was really bearing the pressure was Guhan's mind, Guhan's Purple Palace. If a normal person's mind was under such enormous pressure, they would instantly have a mental breakdown. Then the brain's self-protection mechanism would activate, and the person would fall into a coma. There was a possibility that they would wake up and become crazy. If the sword bearer were to bear this kind of pressure, not only would their mind bear a huge burden, but the Purple Palace would also feel this pressure. All the sword marks would start to vibrate, and the sword bearer would feel a suffocating pain. In short, the pressure of a sword immortal was something that had a certain degree of lethality to humans. It was also a tool to test the spiritual will of the sword bearer. If they could bear the pressure of a sword immortal, it meant that the sword bearer's spiritual will was strong enough, and they were a rare good material. But sword immortals wouldn't use their pressure often. Otherwise, if they weren't careful, they might accidentally turn a precious sword bearer into a lunatic. That would be a great loss. The great sun sword immortal had actually heard of Guhan's name a long time ago. The first time he heard of Guhan's name was when the treasure sword bearer of Chongyang Mountain returned. The leader of the group, Misty Sword Spirit, had personally told the great sun sword immortal that Guhan was a top-notch talent. His talent in sword arts was extremely high, and there were probably not many sword masters in the world who could be his match. In another 10 or 20 years, he would be the next great sun sword immortal. The confused sword spirit had actually underestimated Guhan by a lot, because Guhan's current swordsmanship was probably no lower than the confused sword spirit's, so there was no need to wait for another 10 or 20 years. Then, the great sun sword immortal heard Guhan's name from the mouth of another person. This person was none other than Hao Tianjiendi. The great sun sword immortal went to visit Hao Tianjiendi, and found that Hao Tianjiendi was very weak. After asking, he found out that Hao Tianjiendi had actually fought with Long Shijiendi through the giant void hand. At the end of the conversation, Hao Tianjiendi suddenly asked the great sun sword immortal if he knew Guhan. The great sun sword immortal said he knew. After all, the confused sword spirit had mentioned this name yesterday. Then Hao Tianjiendi told the great sun sword immortal that Yanjing City should treat this Guhan as kindly as possible in the future. This kindness would help Yanjing City in the future. The day after, Jiandi's words had completely ignited the great Sun Sword Immortal's curiosity, so he began to pay special attention to everything about Gohan, and all sorts of information about Gohan was gathered in his hands. This included Gohan's role in the Yuzhong Calamity, the good relationship between Gohan and Misaka Mikoto, Gohan's identity as the military governor in the game, the strange relationship between Gohan and the Lun Yen family, and so on. All in all, on the surface, everything about Gohan was known to the Great Sun Sword Immortal. After obtaining this information, the Great Sun Sword Immortal came to a conclusion. This Gohan was probably one of the 3 most outstanding human geniuses in the past 30 years, and the possibility of him becoming Jiendi was extremely high. Perhaps in 100 years, there would be some Gohan Jiendi ascending to the throne. Therefore, the Great Sun Sword Immortal had the thought of personally testing out Gohan. Originally, the Great Sun Sword Immortal had told himself that it was enough to give Gohan 10% of his sword's celestial aura, and not to ruin the future hope of humanity, Jiendi. However, the Great Sun Sword Immortal realized that Gohan did not have any reaction under 10% of his sword's celestial aura, as if he was as carefree as a gentle breeze. Therefore, the unhappy Great Sun Sword Immortal increased his sword's celestial aura to 30%. Increasing it by 30% was not as simple as tripling it. There was a complicated formula involved, and when it came to Gohan, it produced 10 times more sword celestial aura than before. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was looking forward to seeing Gohan faint from the mental pressure. Even if he did not faint, he should be lying on the ground like a toad. However, although Gohan was sweating a lot, and his expression was much uglier than before, there was still no substantial change. He stood there proudly, unmoving like a bamboo. F***ck, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was an extremely domineering person to begin with. Seeing that Gohan still did not fall, he was instantly enraged. He released 100% of his sword's celestial aura, and Gohan felt like he was being hit on the head by countless hammers. Then, he fell to the ground with a thud, and spat out a few mouthfuls of white foam. Like I said, little guy, don't be too stubborn. It's bad for your body. The Great Sun Sword Immortal smiled contentedly. Then, he pressed a button on his personal terminal. 2 sword bearers walked in and picked up Gohan, who was lying on the ground. Take good care of him. When he wakes up, bring him to see that Ku-Rak-in. With that, the Great Sun Sword Immortal waved his hand, indicating for them to bring Gohan away. He did not notice that the corner of Gohan's mouth seemed to be curling up a little. Chapter 801. When Gohan saw Ku-Rak-in again, this tyrannical descendant was lying on the bed like a dead fish. Yanjing City didn't torture Ku-Rak-in, they just locked him in a cell with only a bed and a table. There was a meal on the table. There were 4 dishes and 1 soup, 2 meat dishes and 2 vegetables. It could be considered a very good prison meal. Before Lu Shihua and his brother met Gohan, they couldn't eat such a good meal. However, the meal had already become cold. Ku-Rak-in was lying motionless on the bed. It was unknown whether he was asleep or pretending to be asleep. You only have 15 minutes. The swordsman who sent Gohan into the cell said to Gohan, then opened the cell door and pushed Gohan into the cell. However, after Gohan went in, the swordsman didn't leave, but waited in the cell. Obviously, he had made up his mind to monitor the whole meeting, not giving Gohan a chance to rescue or pass any information. Gohan ignored the surveillance swordsman, walked directly to Ku-Rak-in's bed, and said to Ku-Rak-in, don't pretend to be asleep, I have some questions to ask you. It's you. Hearing Gohan's voice, Ku-Rak-in finally reacted. He raised his head slightly, and after seeing that it was Gohan, he finally looked like a living person. He turned around and sat up, anxiously pulling Gohan's hand. How is Shasha? Was she caught by Yanjing City? Until now, Ku-Rak-in was still concerned about Yuan Ko Shasha. Unrepentant bastard. Hearing Ku-Rak-in's words, The swordsman who was responsible for monitoring couldn't help but speak. He immediately rushed to Ku-Rakin's bedside, brandishing his fists, intending to beat up Ku-Rakin. However, before he attacked, the sword-wielder was more concerned about Gohan beside him. After all, this Gohan was said to be very powerful. He was from Yuzhong City, just like Ku-Rakin. More importantly, he was a sword master. If Ku-Rakin tried to stop him, he might not be able to beat him up. Therefore, before the swordsman from Yanjing City made a move, he looked at Gohan with a questioning gaze to see what Gohan's attitude was. Please. Gohan didn't say the word please, but he made a please gesture. He didn't know why Gohan didn't stop him and protect Yuzhong City's people. However, now wasn't the time to hesitate. The sword wielder first smiled at Gohan, then raised his fists and hit Ku-Rakin's body like a storm. It was a sharp contrast to the honest smile just now. Ku-Rakin didn't react at all. He didn't even hold his head to protect himself, and just took the punches from the sword wielder. In fact, Ku-Rakin was also a sword master, and his strength was far above the other sword wielder. If Ku-Rakin wanted to defend himself, even if there were 5 sword wielder, they wouldn't be able to hit Ku-Rakin with their fists. Ku-Rakin probably felt guilty, so he didn't resist. After about 5 or 6 minutes, Gohan patted the sword wielder's shoulder lightly. Stop. If you keep hitting him, you'll kill him. I don't think your boss wants him to die now, right? Hee. Sorry, I hit him too hard. The sword wielder smiled, then said fiercely, This guy is too evil. He killed our sword immortal Tianhen, and he still doesn't know how to repent. He's still talking about that Yuan Ko. Beating him up 10 times is already a light punishment. I'm so angry. That makes sense. Gohan nodded in agreement, then pointed at the bruises and blood on Ku-Rakin's body. Do you have any medicine? At least apply some on him, or he'll really die. He doesn't have any medicine? Can't he use it on himself? The sword wielder asked confusedly. It seems like everyone in his dimensional pocket has been confiscated by you. How could he have any medicine on him? Gohan replied with a smile. That's true, but I don't have any medicine on me. The sword wielder touched his head. In his dimensional pocket, apart from a medical pod and a nanocapsule for emergency use, there were no other medicines. How could he have any medicine for injuries? Then please go and get it. Don't worry, there are guards outside. He won't be able to escape, Gohan said with a smile. Oh! The sword wielder nodded happily, then prepared to go and get the medicine. When the sword wielder reached the door, Gohan suddenly added, By the way, little brother, you just beat him up for 10 minutes. I didn't have time to ask you anything. Can you give me another 10 minutes of talking time? Okay. No problem. The sword wielder agreed without hesitation. Now, only Gohan and Ku-Rakin were left in the cell. Moreover, Gohan's talking time had increased from 15 minutes to 20 minutes. I didn't expect you to be so smart. Cough cough. Ku-Rakin struggled to sit up from the bed. He kept twitching, showing the pain his body was in. Although his body was strengthened by a famed sword maiden, the person who beat him up was also a famed sword maiden. As a result, Ku-Rakin was beaten up badly. At the very least, he would suffer internal bleeding. If there was no medicine to treat it, Julvren would probably be in pain for a few days and nights. This is for you. Gohan threw a nanocapsule to Ku-Rakin. Ku-Rakin took the capsule and swallowed it. He instantly felt a lot better. Tell me what happened. How did Sword Immortal Tianhong die? Gohan asked expressionlessly. Answer me first. What happened to Sha Sha? Ku-Rakin clenched his teeth. Was she captured by Yanjing City? I don't know. Gohan answered honestly. Yanjing City is very strict with all information. We couldn't get any other information. I was beaten up by Sword Immortal the Sun in exchange for a chance to see you. I was hoping to find out the truth from you. Then what is Yanjing City going to do with me? Ku Rak-in asked after some thought. They did. Yanjing City has already decided that on the 7th day of Sword Immortal Tian Hong's death, they will kill you and offer you as a blood sacrifice to Sword Immortal Tian Hong. Gohan shrugged. Perhaps in 7 days we will have to part forever. If that's the case, all my hard work these past few days was for nothing. I've got a whole bunch of trouble on my back. The second half of Gohan's sentence came from his feelings when he thought about how he saved King Yu. If he had known that Ku Rak-in was going to die in a few days, Gohan wouldn't have been so interested in making King Yu the starting point. He might as well wait for Ku Rak-in to die and then coordinate King Yu's Gojian sword. Of course, Ku Rak-in didn't know what Gohan meant. He only thought that Gohan had been busy thinking of ways to meet him and save him. Now that he heard that King Yu was going to die, he sighed. All his hard work these past few days was for nothing. Thank you, Comrade Gohan. Ku Rak-in held Gohan's hand and said gratefully. However, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. They're in such a hurry to kill me. It seems like they haven't captured Sha Sha yet. Otherwise, they wouldn't have killed me. What do you mean? Why didn't they kill you after capturing Sha Sha? Gohan asked curiously. Because. Then, Ku Rak-in narrated the entire story. Yesterday afternoon, I was farming in Sword Maiden online when someone suddenly contacted me. Wait, what do you mean? Before Ku Rak-in could start, he was interrupted by Gohan. This sentence exposed a huge problem. Ku Rak-in should have been locked up in the Disciplinary Commission for Discipline Inspections prison yesterday afternoon. How could he still be able to enter the game to farm dungeons? Could it be that the Disciplinary Commission for Discipline Inspections prison was already very human-like? Isn't this something you guys sent in? Then, he reached into his underwear and took out an electronic component the size of a pocket watch. Then, he placed the component in front of Gohan. Didn't you send this thing in so that I can contact you through the internet? Gu Lu-ren was puzzled. Then, he reached into his underwear and took out an electronic component the size of a pocket watch. This wasn't sent by us. Because your life isn't in danger inside, we didn't plan on contacting you at all. We only planned to wait for Sword Immortal Tian Heng's anger to subside. Then, we would naturally let you out, Gohan said with a frown. Then who sent this thing in? Ku Rak-in also realized that something was amiss. Yesterday afternoon, I was farming dungeons. Then, someone in the game suddenly contacted me and told me to immediately find a way to rush to Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Because in 2 hours, Sha Sha will be executed by the people in Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Idiot. Gohan curled his lips. He already told you that Sha Sha is in Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Then, Sha Sha's life can't be in danger. Do you think those crazy scientists in Yuan Ko's first laboratory would be willing to kill a Yun-level Yuan Ko experimental subject that only appears once every 100 years? Gohan's words were like a bomb exploding in Ku Rak-in's ears. Then, he heard Gohan ask, also ask yourself this. When you saw Sha Sha, what state was she in? Was she being executed? This. Sha Sha was stripped naked, and a large piece of her flesh was cut off for research, but she didn't look like she was being executed, right? Gohan added. Then, he made the following conclusion. It seems like the situation is very clear. You were secretly set up by someone. Someone set up a trap for you and let you, an idiot, walk right into it. Chapter 802. Next, Ku Rak-in recounted the events that transpired after that. After learning about Sha Sha in the game, Julvren, who could not sit still, decided to make a prompt decision to think of a way to save Sha Sha from Yuan Yan's first laboratory. Thus, the genius Ku Rak-in came up with the idea of self-mutilation. He suddenly pulled out his King Yu Gojian sword and chopped off his left arm. Then, He shouted to attract the attention of the prison guards and successfully got them to bring him out of the prison and sent him to the hospital next to the disciplinary committee for discipline inspection for treatment. Thus, the genius Ku-Rak-in knocked out the doctor while he was examining his body. He then jumped out of the window of the hospital and escaped to Yuan Ko's first laboratory in one breath. The rest of the story was not worth repeating. What was worth mentioning was that both of Ku-Rak-in's natural sword maidens, including King Yu-Gojin's sword, refused to fight for Ku-Rak-in without exception. The reason was simple. It was because Ku-Rak-in wanted to barge into Yuan Ko's first laboratory in order to save Yuan Ko, and he might even kill a human. This was something that the sword maidens could not accept. Thus, all the sword maidens went on strike and refused to fight for Ku-Rak-in. Although Ku-Rak-in could order the sword maidens to fight for him, Ku-Rak-in hesitated for a while before giving up on the idea. This was because deep in his heart, he did not want to engage in a battle that could be considered as a betrayal of humanity. Thus, Ku-Rak-in could only use his humanless ancient-grade sword maidens to fight as a sword master and barge into Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Since the establishment of Yuan Ko's first laboratory, no human sword maidens had ever barged into it. Who would have thought that such a day would come? There was not a single sword wielder here. Thus, Ku-Rak-in successfully knocked out all the normal human scientists and smoothly found the place where Sha was imprisoned. When Ku-Rak-in saw Sasha's condition, he almost went crazy. Because Sasha is locked naked in a narrow cage made of king alloy. His body was covered in all kinds of restraining talismans, and a large piece of flesh was cut off from his left thigh. The researchers didn't even bandage the wound since they wanted to observe Yuan Ko's recovery ability. According to Ku-Rak-in, Sha had been tortured to the point where she was barely breathing. Her eyes were filled with hatred when she looked at everyone, including Ku-Rak-in himself. I didn't have any other thoughts at the time. I just wanted to save Sha. I didn't want Sha to hate me. Even if I died, I wanted to have a perfect image in her heart. Ku-Rak-in said very sincerely. It seems like there is indeed a mastermind behind you. Gohan let out a long sigh. Use your brain and think. You are just a famed sword-level sword wielder. You can only use an ancient sword-level sword maiden. Yet you ran all the way from the hospital to Yuan Ko's first laboratory. You even killed Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Is that even possible? Do you think you are a sword god? Before I came, I looked up the detailed information about Yuan Ko's first laboratory. Although there are no permanent sword wielder guards Yuan Ko's first laboratory, there is a squad of elite special forces soldiers in charge of protecting it. They are there to prevent hot-headed sword wielder like you from barging in. Those soldiers are the cream of the crop. Combined with the laser guns in their hands, they will not miss a single shot. After a round of fire, your ancient sword-grade swordmistress protective shield will be shattered without a doubt. Only death awaits you. Gohan looked at the pocket watch in Ku-Rak-in's hand. His eyes were filled with caution and worry. But I found out that something happened to these elite Special Forces soldiers the day before. One of the Special Forces soldiers' mother passed away from cancer. Thus, the entire unit applied for leave to visit her. Because almost 1,000 years have passed peacefully, the director of Yuan Ko's first laboratory directly approved the Special Forces soldiers' application for leave. Otherwise, how could you have barged all the way to the place where Sha was imprisoned? You mean to say that my journey was so smooth because of the mastermind behind the scenes? Ku-Rak-in fell silent. He had always thought that his journey was so smooth because of his own abilities. He did not expect that someone had secretly given him a cheat. So be it. These are only enough for me to confirm that there is a mastermind behind all this. What happened next? Most importantly, how did Sword Immortal Tian Hen die? Gohan emphasized the word, die, with great emphasis. He really did die at Sha's hands. Ku-Rak-in smiled bitterly. At that time, I carried Sha and prepared to escape. However, the void gate opened at the same time, and Sword Immortal Tian Heng walked out from it. I knew that things were over. Sha Sha and I would not be able to escape. So you plan to kill him and escape? Gohan narrowed his eyes. No. No matter how important Sha Sha was, I would never kill a human Sword Immortal for her sake. Even if I had to die, I would never let Sword Immortal Tian Heng die. Ku Rock-in hurriedly shook his head in denial. I was planning to beg Sword Immortal Tian Heng to let Sha Sha leave Yanjing City and live a carefree life in the outside world. Is that even possible? Do you think Sword Immortal Tian Heng would agree to such a ridiculous request? Gohan sneered. I knew it was impossible, but for Sha Sha's sake I had to try. Ku Rock-in clenched his fists. I would kneel before Sword Immortal Tian Heng and hug his leg. I would tell him that I could give up everything. I could even sever all the sword scars in my mind palace and return the Yu King Gojian sword to Sword Immortal Tian Heng. I only hope that Sword Immortal Tian Heng would spare Sha Sha's life. Sha Sha would die if she stayed here. You're actually willing to give up on the Yu King Gojian sword? Gohan looked at Ku Rock-in in surprise. Gohan had seen Ku Rock-in's extravagant request for the Yu King Gojian sword. In order to coordinate with the Yu King Gojian sword, this guy had abandoned his usual image of a Chunibyu. But now, for the sake of Sha Sha, he was actually willing to give up on the Yu King Gojian sword. And this wasn't just a simple abandonment. He was abandoning his sword scars by severing his own sword scars. This way, Ku Rock-in would lose all of his sword maidens. Without them, it would be almost impossible for him to gather the 90,000 quarks of sword essence needed to become a spirit sword wielder. He would also no longer be able to coordinate with a spirit sword wielder. This would completely cut off any possibility of him becoming a sword wielder. This descendant of Sword Immortal White Stallion would become an ordinary person for the rest of his life, a cripple. He would become a cripple because of a single Yuan Ko. He would become a joke in everyone's mouths, a negative example of what mothers would teach their children in bedtime stories. The price that Ku Rock-in had to pay was even worse than death. You don't have to guess to know that Sword Immortal Tian Heng would never agree to this. Gohan looked at Ku Rock-in. Then what happened next? Next, there was nothing else I could do. I could only hug his leg and keep begging him. Then, Sword Immortal Tian Heng kicked me away and released a few streaks of sword essence to capture Sha Sha and lock her back in the cage, Ku Rock-in said in a low voice. Just a few streaks of sword essence? Isn't Sword Immortal Tian Heng being a little too arrogant? Can a few streaks of sword essence trap a universe-level Yuan Ko? Gohan asked in confusion. That's because Sha Sha still has a sealing talisman on her body. Therefore, in Sword Immortal Tian Heng's eyes, Sha Sha might just be a tiger-level Yuan Ko. It's not strange that Sword Immortal Tian Heng is being so arrogant. Ku Rock-in explained. Talismans were a type of tool developed by humans. Its main function was to restrict Yuan Ko's abilities. Depending on how the talisman was made and the materials used, it could control different levels of Yuan Ko. As for the setting of the talisman, there was no need to explain it too clearly. In any case, it was equivalent to a high-strength atomic steel handcuff. Even a human with unparalleled strength like Lu Bu would not be able to break free from such a handcuff. Therefore, in Sword Immortal Tian Heng's eyes, it was understandable that he could capture a universe-level Yuan Ko with just a few streaks of sword essence. Go on, what happened next? After that, I saw Sha Sha suddenly rush towards the sword essence that was supposed to trap her. Sha Sha suddenly moved, but Sword Immortal Tian Heng didn't change the trajectory of his sword essence. Therefore, the soft sword essence that was supposed to trap Sha Sha ended up being used as an offensive sword essence. It cut Sha Sha's skin to pieces, but it also cut off all the talismans on her body. Hearing Ku Rock-in's words, Gohan couldn't help but admire Sha Sha's quick-wittedness. She actually thought of a way to escape death. This talisman should be able to defend against Yuan Ko's power, but it couldn't defend against the sword essence of its wielder. Sword Immortal Tianheng had actually trapped himself and helped Sha Sha escape from the talisman's control. After that, Sha Sha started fighting with Sword Immortal Tianheng's sword lady. The battle was very intense. I've never seen such an exciting battle before. However, Sha Sha was injured, so she was quickly suppressed by Sword Immortal Tianheng's sword lady. Even the 9 snake hairs that Sha Sha used to fight were cut off. Without the snake hairs, Sha Sha couldn't even compare to a meteor-level Yuan Ko. At that time, I had already lost all hope. I only wanted to save Sha Sha's life, so I gathered the last of my strength and threw myself at Sword Immortal Tianheng. I wanted to use this to disrupt Sword Immortal Tianheng's control over the sword lady and give Sha Sha a chance to escape. However, I overestimated myself. Before I could even touch Sword Immortal Tianheng's body, I was sent flying by Sword Immortal Tianheng's sword. There was a huge gash on my chest, and even my intestines were spilling out from the wound. Saying this, Kurakin's expression became even more bitter. And when Sha Sha saw my appearance, she let out a shrill howl. In the end, her body quickly shrank, and finally became a small golden person that fell to the ground. A small golden person! Hearing this, Gohan fell into deep thought. This was because Gohan suddenly remembered that Medusa's divinity was a small golden person. Could it be that Sha Sha's true body was actually Medusa's divinity? But wasn't a divinity a simple computer CPU? Could it be that a small CPU could evolve into an entire computer by itself? Chapter 803. According to Kurakin, after Sha Sha transformed back into the golden humanoid, Sword Immortal Tianheng was pleasantly surprised. After Sha Sha transformed back into the golden humanoid, Sword Immortal Tianheng's face was filled with surprise and joy. He picked up the golden humanoid as if it were a precious treasure. I can still explain this. Perhaps Sword Immortal Tianheng recognized this thing as Yuan Yan's divine spark, which is why he was so overjoyed. However, what happened next was incomprehensible. After picking up the golden divinity, Sword Immortal Tianheng did something that Kurakin could not understand. Sword Immortal Tianheng swallowed Sha Sha's divinity without any hesitation. Yes, that's right. Sword Immortal Tianheng swallowed Sha Sha's divinity in one gulp. A divinity was not like a pig's kidney, which could nourish a man's kidney. Sword Immortal Tianheng was a living human. He did not have a divinity in his body. Why would he eat a divinity? Moreover, could a divinity be eaten? Would he be eaten to death by the divinity? Sword Immortal Tianheng seemed to be very sure that a divinity could be eaten. Otherwise, he would not have swallowed it without hesitation. However, reality proved that Sword Immortal Tianheng was wrong. Less than half a minute after he swallowed Sha Sha's divinity, a ray of light flew out from Sword Immortal Tianheng's stomach and disappeared. Sword Immortal Tianheng closed his eyes forever, becoming a useless corpse lying on the ground. Apart from you, did anyone else see this? Gohan believed that Kurakin was telling the truth. Who would have thought that a sword immortal of this generation would die in such a strange way at the hands of a divinity? If things were really as Gulvren had said, then Gulvren would not be the one to blame for this. Sword Immortal Tianheng was the one who had dug his own grave. He had inexplicably swallowed the divinity into his stomach, and only then did he manage to survive his own death. At most, Gulvren would be charged with the crime of breaking into Yuan Ying's first laboratory. He would be imprisoned for 8 to 10 years in the Discipline Commission for Discipline Inspection. He would not be beheaded at all. Therefore, to save Kurakin's life, it was extremely important to find proof that Sword Immortal Tianheng had swallowed Sha Sha's divinity. As long as they had this evidence, if Yanjing City dared to execute Kurakin, Gohan would publicize this evidence to see if Yanjing City had the guts to kill Ku Rakin for this reason. After all, this world valued the life and death of a sword bearer. As long as Ku Rakin did not have the slightest intention of killing Sword Immortal Tianhong, Yanjing City could not kill him to avenge Sword Immortal Tianhong. No, I was the only one. Ku Rakin shook his head. What about the surveillance cameras? An important place like Yuan Ko's first laboratory would definitely have a complete surveillance system. As long as the surveillance cameras recorded the entire process, that would be the best evidence, Gohan continued. There shouldn't be any surveillance cameras. An extremely awkward expression suddenly appeared on Ku Rakin's face. When I snuck into Yuan Ko's first laboratory, I purposely cut off the power to all the surveillance cameras. The entire surveillance system was paralyzed, so there's no way those cameras could have captured this scene. Ku Rakin's words left Gohan speechless. This was the best way to explain the phrase, one's own trap. Ku Rakin had forcefully destroyed the easiest evidence to prove his innocence. What happened in the end? What happened in the end? Gohan could only continue asking. In the end, I could have tried to escape. After all, the second sword bearer who arrived was more than a minute away from Sword Immortal Tianhong's death. Ku Rakin waved his hand. But by then, Sha Sha had already disappeared. I don't know if she's dead or alive. Although I didn't directly kill Sword Immortal Tianhong, he was definitely related to me. I didn't have the face to run anymore. So I just stayed there and waited for the new sword bearer to capture me. What happened next is hard to say. I was locked up here by the angry people of Yanjing City, waiting for my death. Did you tell Yanjing City how Sword Immortal Tianhong died? What was their attitude when they heard about it? Gohan asked again. Of course, I told them the truth as soon as I could. However, they were blinded by anger and thought that I was just making things up. They didn't believe that a sword bearer in his right mind would swallow a Yun-level Yuan Ko's godhead for no reason. So, after I explained, they beat me up and called me a coward who didn't dare to take responsibility. I didn't have the mood to argue with them anymore. Ku Rakin said faintly. This meant that Ku Rakin had basically given up all hope. Ku Rakin's ups and downs story finally came to an end. Gohan also completely dissected the story in his mind and came up with the following important point. The first important point was to find evidence that Sword Immortal Tianhong had swallowed Sha Sha's godhead. As long as they had this evidence, Ku Rakin's chances of survival would double. The second important point was to find Sha Sha's whereabouts. According to Ku Rakin, after Sha Sha's godhead broke out of Sword Immortal Tianhong's stomach, it turned into a ray of light and disappeared without a trace. As for whether or not it escaped from Yanjing City, Gohan didn't know. If it was just Yuan Ko, then Sha Sha would definitely still be in Yanjing City because she couldn't pass through Yanjing City's super-dimensional wall system. However, the problem was that Sha Sha wasn't just Yuan Ko. When she entered Yanjing City, she perfectly avoided all kinds of human detection devices. Maybe she could pass through the dimensional wall like a real human. A day had passed. Judging from the attitude of the Yanjing City's sword bearers, they definitely hadn't caught Sha Sha's godhead yet. This almost told Gohan that Sha Sha had already escaped from the dimensional wall. Otherwise, with Yanjing City's complete control over the city, there was no way they couldn't find a godhead in the city. The third important point was the mastermind behind the scenes. It was obvious that all of this was controlled by the mastermind behind the scenes. Perhaps Sword Immortal Tianheng's foolish decision to devour Sha Sha's god's divinity was also the work of the mastermind behind the scenes. This mastermind had already calculated everything, and Sword Immortal Tianheng's death must have been part of his plan. If they could catch this mastermind, then Ku Rakin's life would be safe. This was because the people of Yanjing City knew that Ku Rakin didn't have much responsibility in this. They probably wanted to kill Ku Rakin because they wanted to vent their anger. They just wanted to find an outlet to vent their anger. Once Gohan found the mastermind, the outlet would instantly be transferred to the mastermind. At most, Ku-Rak-In would be imprisoned for 10 or 20 years. His life should be fine. Just wait here. Gohan stood up and concluded with Ku-Rak-In. They might let you go or they might kill you. If they still want to kill you in the end, you should at least die a heroic death. Don't embarrass Yuzhong City. I understand. I will die a heroic death. I will be like Sword Immortal by Colt Ju Wudao's son. Ku-Rak-In nodded earnestly. He actually took the initiative to say that he was Ju Wudao's son. It seemed that he had already let go of the hatred he had for his father. But what was the point? His father was already dead. Why couldn't he say these words when he was alive? Did he have to be like a teenager who could only use death to awaken their wisdom? I should go too. Gohan nodded and prepared to leave. Wait. I have one more thing, but this is only my guess. I can't confirm whether it's true or not, Ku-Rak-In suddenly said. What guess? It's that Sword Immortal Tian Heng's sword Maiden, Kunlun's sword, might have disappeared. When Sword Immortal Tian Heng consumed this godhood, Kunlun's sword was clearly still in his scabbard. But when Sha Sha left, his scabbard was empty. That Kunlun's sword had already disappeared, Ku-Rak-In said softly. So, when your Sha Sha left, she also took the sword Maiden, Kunlun's sword? Gohan suddenly turned around and looked at Ku-Rak-In with a pained expression. After a moment of silence he said, Eat more in the future. This might be your last few meals. Mr. Gohan, I've brought the medicine for you. The swordsman who had beaten up Ku-Rak-In ran back with a bottle of medicine. He looked at the time. It was exactly 20 minutes. Then please apply the medicine for him. My mission is complete. I have to go. After Gohan finished, he left the prison without looking back, leaving the sword wielder who felt like he had been played for a fool. Actually, in Ku-Rak-In's narration, there was another matter that Gohan was very concerned about, and that was the matter of Yu King Go Jian Jian. Ku-Rak-In said that on the day he entered the Discipline Commission for Discipline Inspection Prison, with the help of the pocket watch, he managed to successfully synchronize the King of Yu Go Jian's sword into Sword Maiden online. According to this timeline, Gohan had only just entered the Rise from the Ground dungeon. According to normal people's understanding, King Yu's soul should have been absorbed back into his body from the Instance dungeon, leaving Gohan with an artificial King Yu Go Jian Jian's body. Sword Maiden Online had always been like this, there had never been an exception. But Qi did not react at all, and completed the dungeon with him. This proved that I Ching was not lying. King Yu had indeed undergone a qualitative change when he sacrificed himself to the sword. The connection between the consciousness fragment and the main body had been severed. From then on, the King of Yu had nothing to do with the King of Yu, Go Jian Jian's sword. Even if Gohan didn't do anything, the King of Yu wouldn't have left Gohan. This proved once again that if the starting point sword and the past water sword hadn't been created, then Gohan's painstaking effort to activate the furnace of heaven and earth would have been a complete waste of time and effort. Perhaps Ku-Rak-In's tragic fate could have been avoided. But why did the mysterious person give Ku-Rak-In a tool to surf the internet? Just to pass on a piece of information? Then why not just throw the information to Ku-Rak-In like how he threw the pocket watch to Ku-Rak-In? There was no need to go through the trouble of surfing the internet. Therefore, the mastermind might have included Gohan himself. His goal was to let Ku-Rak-In's King of Yu, Go Jian Jian Jian, absorb the King of Yu's consciousness fragment. However, they didn't expect that the King of Yu had already separated from the main body. Who is the mastermind behind this? What is he planning? Gohan thought with a heavy expression. However, there was one thing that made Gohan heave a sigh of relief. The mastermind wasn't omniscient and omnipotent. They didn't know that the King of Yu had already separated from the main body. As long as they weren't omniscient and omnipotent, it was fine. Otherwise, Gohan would have already lost this battle. Chapter 804. Although it had been delayed several times, the Octagon tournament was finally held. Because it was a competition between the schools of the major Bay cities, the venue was naturally arranged in the arena of Yenjing University, which was the host city. Yenjing University's arena did not have any other special features. Its biggest feature was that it was very big. Altogether, it was as big as 20 football fields. It was said that this arena was planned according to the combat range of immortal sword-level sword holders. It was a pity that after this training ground was built, there were very few immortal sword wielders who fought here. Most of the time, it was ancient sword wielders or treasure sword wielders who fought here. There were very few famed sword wielders. After all, this training ground was the training ground of the academy that was responsible for training new sword wielders. In a year, more than 98% of the sword holders were at the ancient sword level, and then 99% of the sword holders were lucky enough to become treasure sword level sword holders. Only a small group of people at the top could become famed sword level sword holders. Generally speaking, in every year's Octagon tournament, among the 3 elite students selected by each school, 8 or 9 out of 10 were treasure sword level sword holders. Every year, at most, there were 1 or 2 schools that could pretend to be famed sword-level sword holders. Originally, the championship battle of the Octagon tournament was the simplest way of fighting. It was a one-on-one battle, and whoever won in the end would be the final champion. But in this way, the champion was often born among these famed sword-level sword holders. For treasure sword-level sword holders, it was good enough to fight for third place. This had also become a point of criticism in the 8 Academies tournament. Some people said that it would be better not to send any sword-bearers from the treasure sword realm. Academies that did not produce any sword-bearers from the famed sword realm should just not participate in the tournament. That was why the 8 Academies tournament had undergone certain changes. It had changed from a simple martial arts competition to a more comprehensive competition. Not only had a cultural test been added, but the martial arts competition had also been changed to a team competition that required more teamwork. Finally, the winning rate of academies with famed sword-level geniuses had been reduced from 94% to 64%, reaching a certain degree of balance. This year was supposed to be a great year for Yuzhong University, as it was the first time that Yuzhong University had 2 famed sword-bearers. One was Gu Han, who was part of the plan, and the other was Ku Rakin, who had unexpectedly become a famous sword wielder in Yenjing City. Of course, the Elite 8 Academies tournament would have some betting companies acting as the bankers. They would set up a betting event that everyone could participate in to bet on who the champion of the tournament would be. Naturally, Yuzhong University was favored the most because they had 2 famed swordsmen, which was almost certain to win the competition. Therefore, Yuzhong University's odds were only about 1-1-0-11, which was not even enough to pay the gambling tax. This greatly suppressed the interest of the gamblers, so no one bought Yuzhong City's chips at all. The gambling industry was also in despair, feeling that this year's Octagon tournament was destined to not make much money. However, something dramatic happened. 7 days ago, Yenjing City suddenly announced that it had changed its participant list. 2 of the original 3 treasured sword-level sword holders had been replaced, and all of them had been replaced with famed sword-level sword holders. This immediately caused the entire Yenjing City to be excited. Yenjing City also had 2 famed sword-level sword holders, so Yuzhong City was naturally going to lose. Therefore, Yuzhong City's odds kept rising and finally rose to 1-1-87. Then, following Yenjing City's lead, London City suddenly changed its participant list and replaced it with a famed sword-level sword holder. Then, the other cities seemed to have suddenly discovered that they had super geniuses, and they all changed the list of their academies. In the end, every city had a famed sword-level sword holder participating. The most terrifying was Moscow City, which had actually replaced 3 famed sword-level sword holders in one go. It was as if they were determined to win the championship. Therefore, the odds of each academy changed dramatically in an instant. Moscow City's odds dropped to 1-1-23, while Yuzhong City's odds rose all the way to 1-2-34. An even bigger change came last night, when Yuzhong City suddenly announced to the public. As one of Yuzhong City's participating students, Ku Rokin, who was a famed sword-level sword holder, could not participate in the Elite 8 Academy's tournament due to some inconvenient reasons. Since they could not find a suitable teammate to replace Ku Rokin, Yuzhong City decided to only send 2 sword holders to participate in the tournament. As soon as this news was announced, Yuzhong City's odds instantly soared, and in the end, it directly rose to a terrifying ratio of 1-8-36. However, last night, the gambling company seemed to have received a large order, and this large order was all placed on Yuzhong City, directly lowering the odds of Yuzhong City from 1-8-26 to 1-4-56. Someone made a simple calculation based on this ratio and came to the conclusion that a local tycoon had spent at least 60 billion renminbi on Yuzhong City being the final champion. This couldn't help but remind people of the story in the Elite 8 Cities tournament in Sword Lady Online not long ago. It was said that the military governor had bet all his assets on being able to defeat the number 1 sword holder of the spirit sword level. Then, the military governor made a lot of money, earning a total of 70 billion renminbi. As a result, some smart people or some well-informed people began to bet on Yuzhong City and slowly reduced the odds to 1-3-14. They also raised the odds of Moscow City to 1-1-42. This ratio would at least allow them to earn a large sum of money after deducting the gambling tax. Therefore, most of the onlookers who did not have access to the news excitedly bet on the city of Moscow, wanting to earn a little bit of luck. But the most dramatic change occurred an hour before the end of the final betting. The odds of Yanjing City suddenly began to decrease rapidly from the original 1-1-98 to 1-1-46, which was even lower than Moscow City's by 0-1. This meant that at least 50 billion renminbi had poured into the options of Yanjing City at the last moment, and then the odds of Yuzhong City had risen to 1-3-52. Obviously, this was the result of some of the second generation who had gotten the latest news. But what kind of news did they get that actually made them throw more than 50 billion renminbi into the tournament in just an hour? Therefore, making money was very simple. As long as you had information and channels that others didn't know, you could easily put the money into your own pocket, and you didn't have to bear any legal risks at all. Just like those second generation who easily put money into their own pockets after the reform and opening up. Anyway, the gambling industry had always been to cheat the money of fools, so it would be a waste not to cheat. Back to the point, all the cameras had been placed in the martial arts arena early, and all the media were ready to start the live broadcast of this competition that compared the potential of the younger generation in the 8 major base cities. At this time, the contestants had not yet appeared on the stage. Some cameramen stood beside their equipment, rubbing their hands hard while chatting with the colleagues beside them. It seems that this time Moscow is in the bag. There is no suspense about the first place. A cameraman was the first to speak. You can't say that. A few years ago, other cities were also stronger than our Yanjing City on paper. They had one more famous sword-bearer, and they had powerful sword-bearers who were among the top 12 sword ladies of the treasured swords level. But in the end, it was still our Yanjing City who had the last laugh. This competition is not just a test of strength, but more importantly, brains and ability. Another cameraman said disdainfully. This time, Moscow is really in the bag. Another cameraman interrupted. This cameraman was known as a clairvoyant in the circle. Because his friends were all over the major base cities, He knew a lot of information that others did not know. I don't know if you have heard. This time, there is a super fierce person in Moscow Bay City. When Moscow was attacked, he alone killed more than 500 Yuan Ko, and there were even 5 nether-level Yuan Ko among them. Think about it, this person is a guy who has been a sword-bearer for less than a year, and he can already defeat a nether-level Yuan Ko. Even if you tell me that he is the future Jendi, I would believe it, let alone a mere Elite 8 Academies tournament. Is he really that fierce? A famous sword-bearer who defeated a nether-level Yuan Ko in just a year? The other cameramen were amazed. If this news was true, then Moscow was really in the bag. Bah! What do you know? A young man with his quantum camera came to the side of the group of cameramen. However, he was not a media reporter, but a freelance photography enthusiast. It could be seen from the blonde beauty behind him. Which cameraman would bring such a girl out to work? Only those rich photography enthusiasts would do so. Now that the betting has ended, there is no harm in telling you. Just wait and see. This time, the first place is still from our Yanjing city, the rich man said proudly. In the middle of the arena, there was a row of pyramid-shaped seats. At the top of the pyramid, there was a golden chair that looked like a dragon chair. There were 2 chairs on the second floor, 4 on the third floor, 8 on the fourth floor, and 9 on the fifth floor, for a total of 24 chairs. The chairs in the first city were like dragon chairs, and the chairs on the second floor had the aura and luxury of a tiger. The chairs on the third floor were ordinary armchairs, the chair on the fourth floor was the simplest wooden chair, and the lowest floor only had a row of small plastic stools. Obviously, these chairs represented status, and the status would naturally be different depending on the chair. This was the most special event of the Elite 8 Academies tournament, the throne. This did not need to be assigned by the organizer, and it was up to the participants to decide which chair to sit in. As long as one was confident enough, one could go straight to the top and sit in the chair at the top. However, in contrast, the kind of chair one sat in would naturally have to bear the same risk. If one accidentally fell off, one would be smashed to pieces. This was also one of the biggest entertainment in the Elite 8 Academies tournament. Chapter 805. There were no leaders sitting on the stage during the 8 Academies tournament. The contestants sat in the audience, and then each leader came on stage to give an impassioned speech. Then, the national anthem was played, and the previous contestants were invited to give speeches. Finally, the contestants' representatives were invited to speak on stage. The high-level sword-bearers did not even show up directly. They would only secretly hide in the one-way perspective platforms at both ends of the martial arts arena and silently watch the contestants' performances. Neither the contestants nor the audience could see the expressions of these high-level sword-bearers. No one knew what these high-level sword-bearers were thinking. The 8 Academies tournament begins now. A voice that seemed to come from every corner of the air announced the official start of the 8 Academies tournament. Let's welcome the delegation from Buenos Aires Academy. The order of each academy's appearance was not fixed, but it was not random either. It was decided according to the results of the last 8 Academies tournament. The first place in the previous tournament was the 7th or 8th from the bottom, and the last place in the previous tournament was the first or the last to appear. Did it sound a little weird? Did it feel that this order was a little inexplicable? That was because Yanjing Academy was also included, because the strength of Yanjing City had always been the strongest among the 8 base cities. Therefore, Yanjing City very modestly said that no matter how the ranking changed in the future, Yanjing City would always be the last to appear. Therefore, even if the last place in the last 8 Academies tournament was Yanjing City would still be the last to appear. Unlike the last place in the previous 8 Academies tournament, Buenos Aires Academy became the first to appear. The 3 people from Buenos Aires Academy soon appeared in front of the throne of the pyramid. The contestants from Buenos Aires Academy were composed of 2 sword-bearers and 1 sword-bearer from famous sword level. There were 2 men and 1 woman, and the only girl was also the only sword-bearer from Buenos Aires Academy at famous sword level. This girl was a very tall girl with red hair. She was extremely tall and should be about 1.8 meters. In this 1.8 meters height, her pair of slender legs occupied at least more than 1 meter. Her overall figure gave off the feeling of a skinny girl, but what was incongruous with this bony figure was the pair of huge E-cup opie on her chest. An E-cup opie didn't seem to be that big of a deal. At the very least, when Maiden's opie was far larger than hers. However, when such a pair of opies were placed on a skinny and weak girl, the huge contrast made the pair of opies seem especially huge. The cameramen licked their lips and wished they could take a bite out of the opie. Oh my God! What's this woman's name? I really want to take a bite. Although the photographer was hugging a pretty blonde beauty, he still couldn't help but drool at the sight of her. Her name is Leslie Dracula. She's the daughter of the Dracula family in Buenos Aires. If you're interested, you can take a bite out of her. The cameraman, who was known as the clairaudient, said, Dracula family. As the second generation, he was terrified and no longer said anything about taking a bite. This Dracula family was really too scary. There were a total of 2 Dracula families in this world. One of them was the Dracula family in Buenos Aires City. Their ancestor was Saint Giendi. The other Dracula family was the Dracula family in Yuan Ko world. They belonged to the Western Beast Camp and were the loyal servants of the devil god Satan. They were the most powerful vampire family in the world. Although both families had the surname Dracula, they were not related at all. The descendants of the 2 families had met 6 or 7 times, and each time they met, they would fight each other without saying a word. Either one of them died or the other died. Both families had a blood feud with each other. Although Saint Giendi did not have a dazzling battle record like Châtillon Giendi or Gu Jin Giendi, his descendants of the Dracula family were extraordinary. There were a total of 9 immortal-level sword-bearers, which meant that there would be 1 immortal-level sword-bearer every 3 generations of descendants of the Dracula family. They could be said to be the most powerful family in the world, apart from the Leonian family. The Dracula family also had a firm grasp on the power of Buenos Aires Bay City. As long as the immortal sword-wielder of the family was alive, the Dracula family would be the chairman of the Sword Committee of Buenos Aires Bay City. The Dracula family had a lot of power in Buenos Aires Bay City. Someone had made a not-so-scientific ranking of all the families in the human world, and the Dracula family was ranked 4th. One could imagine how terrifying this family was. Unless this second generation was a direct descendant of Longsher Giendi, Hao Tian Giendi, or the Leonian family, he would definitely be given an unforgettable experience if he offended the Dracula family. I'll tell you a little more secret. The clairaudient cameraman rolled his eyes at the second generation in disdain and whispered, Actually, this descendant of the Dracula family just turned 18 last month. It's said that her innate sword element exceeds 12,000 quarks, and she's a genius with the highest innate sword element among the descendants of the Dracula family. I heard that the Dracula family has decided to cultivate this Leslie Dracula into the second Giendi of the Dracula family, even if they have to exhaust all of the family's resources, hundreds of years of heritage, and favors. So, don't be fooled by the fact that she only became a sword-bearer a month ago, skipping the ancient sword level and treasured sword level to directly become a famed sword-level sword-bearer. Her strength will definitely crush more than 95% of the famed sword-level sword-bearers. If it weren't for the Dawn of Dawn in Moscow, I'd bet on the Buenos Aires Academy for the first place. That's so awesome. The cameramen around them who heard these words looked at the tall Leslie Dracula with envious, jealous, and hateful expressions. You can start choosing your seats among the thrones now. Please remember, once you've sat down, you can't change your seat. You must be responsible for your choice. The host's voice continued to ring from all directions. Leslie Dracula bowed at the observation platform, then nodded at the two treasured sword-level sword-bearers behind her. The two treasured sword-level sword-bearers immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as if they had been granted amnesty, and walked towards the throne. After a brief hesitation, the two treasured sword-level sword-bearers wisely chose the two seats at the bottom level. After her two classmates had chosen their seats, Leslie Dracula finally walked slowly towards the throne. She did not even look at the last three levels, and walked straight to the seat between the first and second level. It was obvious that Leslie Dracula was very conflicted between the first and second level. She seemed to really want to sit on the first seat at the top, but something kept tugging at her clothes, preventing her from taking that last step. In the end, Leslie Dracula still sat on a seat on the second level. That's strange. I heard that Leslie Dracula is very arrogant and very confident in herself. She has a supercilious personality. Why didn't she just sit on the throne at the top? The clairaudient cameraman asked in confusion. You don't understand. Of course it's because Leslie Dracula is very tactful. She knows that the throne at the top isn't something her but can sit on. Seeing that the clairaudient cameraman who had just looked down on him was confused, Second Gen immediately continued to mock him, as if that would be able to get rid of his previous ignorance. Let's welcome the UCLA delegation to the stage. Following the Buenos Aires College was the UCLA delegation. Different from the Buenos Aires College's team of 2 men and 1 woman, the UCLA team was made up of 3 men. The 3 boys were wearing the same black short-sleeved shirts with a huge white skull printed on them. Plus, the 3 men all had cold expressions, as if they were gangsters participating in a competition. Los Angeles was also made up of 1 famed swordsman and 2 treasured swordsmen. However, to everyone's surprise, the famed swordsman didn't sit on the top 2 levels like Leslie Dracula did. Instead, the 3 of them sat on the lowest level. The 3 sword-bearers had their arms around each other's shoulders and sat together as if they were brothers. Even if the famous sword-bearers could sit in a higher position, he didn't care about it. He just wanted to stay with his brothers. The surrounding onlookers and the commoners who were watching the 8 Academies assembly live on TV applauded. However, the 2 sword-bearers from the University of Buenos Aires, who were sitting with the 3 black-shirt brothers, were in an awkward position. They wanted to change their seats so that they would not be squeezed with the 3 black-shirt brothers. However, that was impossible. The host had already made it very clear that once a seat was chosen, they couldn't change it. Otherwise, they would be judged as having lost. Sir, do you know who these 3 people are? The cameramen around them asked the clairaudient cameraman. Second Gen, who had expressed his disdain for the clairaudient cameraman, couldn't help but perk up his ears. He wanted to know who these 3 strange people in black were. They are the famous Skull Brothers from the UCLA College. The clairaudient cameraman enjoyed this feeling very much. He cleared his throat and began to speak. Chapter 806. I heard that the 3 skeleton brothers were originally members of the Los Angeles Mafia. Because they grew up in the same orphanage, they became closer than real brothers. The clairaudient cameraman lived up to his nickname of clairaudient as he narrated the origins of the 3 skeleton brothers. The 3 skeleton brothers are very vicious. Not only are they ruthless to their enemies, they are also ruthless to themselves. They have made quite a name for themselves in the Los Angeles underworld. Later, the 3 skeleton brothers offended the gang they were in and were tricked out of the city by the gang. They wanted to kill the 3 skeleton brothers outside the city, but it was a blessing in disguise. They met a passing sword-bearer, and the 3 skeleton brothers were adopted by this sword-bearer. When the 3 skeleton brothers came of age, they went to the sword pavilion together to coordinate with the sword lady. In the past year, they've spent less than 20 days in Los Angeles. The rest of the time is spent outside the city. I don't know how many Yuaning they've killed, but in less than a year, they've accumulated 10,000 quarks of sword essence to become a famed sword-level swordsman and become a famed sword-level swordsman. According to my assessment, I don't know how strong the 3 skeleton brothers are, but they definitely have the most combat experience among all the contestants. Awesome, my brother! After listening to the clairaudient cameraman's narration, the other cameramen gave him a thumbs up, expressing their sincere admiration. Even the second generation didn't have the face to show off anymore. He could only pick up his quantum video camera and take pictures of the contestants sitting on the thrones, especially Leslie Dracula, who knew how much of the second generation's film had been wasted with that pair of opies. Let's welcome the Berlin College's delegation to the stage. As soon as the 3 skeleton brothers took their seats, the new Berlin College's delegation also came in. Contrary to the 3 skeleton brothers, the 3 members of the Berlinale Institute's delegation were all girls. Under the protection of 2 female knights in golden armor, a little lowly with golden ponytails walked at the front of the group. The most eye-catching thing about this lowly were her 2 soft, slender, golden ponytails. The ends of her hair actually reached the lowly's knees, almost covering her entire back. Guhan had actually met this little lowly once before. She was the leader of the sword-bearers in Balan city of Chongyang Mountain, the golden-haired lowly named Lydia. It was just that at that time, Lydia didn't comb her hair into twin ponytails. Instead, she had long, straight, blonde hair. However, after combing it into twin ponytails, the little lowly's lowly attribute became even more intense. She was as dazzling as the sun, stimulating the weird uncles in front of the TV to howl. They wished they could kneel in front of Lydia and let her stomp on them a few times, or use her golden twin ponytails to whip themselves a few times. Lydia! Quick, come to me! Leslie Dracula, who was sitting on the throne, waved at Lydia with a smirk on her face, gesturing for her to sit beside her. This cocky woman, Lydia said unhappily. Then, she strode to Leslie Dracula's side, shook her head, and whipped Leslie Dracula's face with her golden ponytails. I'll whip you to death. I'll whip you to death, Lydia muttered. Stop it! Leslie Dracula grabbed Lydia's twin ponytails, poked her waist, and pointed to the top throne next to her head. I've specially left the best seat for you. Hurry up and sit on it, Leslie Dracula said with a smile. It seemed that she was really sitting on the second floor just to give the top throne to Lydia. Sit on it yourself if you can. Lydia retracted her twin ponytails. She instinctively wanted to sit next to Leslie Dracula, which was also the last seat on the second floor. I'm not sitting with you. Disgusting. After saying that, she found a seat on the 3rd floor that was the furthest from Leslie Dracula and sat down. The 2 female knights that she brought with her immediately made up their minds and sat down right below her on the 4th floor. That's strange. Why doesn't Lydia have the intention to sit on the top throne? I heard that Lydia isn't like this. The clairaudient cameraman found it stranger and stranger. Not only did Leslie Dracula not dare to sit on the top throne, even Lydia, whose background was not inferior to hers, did not dare to sit there. Bro, where did this Lydia come from? The cameraman at the side asked hurriedly. I can't say that. Otherwise, I'll be suspected of exaggerating the number of words. You can go back and take a look at chapter 408, the clairaudient said with an expression that said, I'm never joking. Next, the members of London College and Jerusalem College appeared one after another. One of the 3 from London College was a famed sword-level swordsman. However, this famed sword-level swordsman was not Reinhardt from Chongyang Mountain. It was said that ever since Reinhardt lost to Guhan, he had not recovered from the setback and had no chance of breaking through to become a famed sword-level swordsman. Even if he did break through, he would not be qualified to participate in the 8 Academies tournament. It had been a few years since he became a treasured sword-level swordsman. This time, the famed sword-level swordsman from London College, was a skinny bespectacled boy in a traditional English robe. He had black pupils and a head of light blonde hair. It was obvious that he was a boy of mixed Chinese and Western descent. The boy was even more straightforward than Lydia. He did not even look at the seats on the first and second floor and chose to sit next to Lydia. The two of them seemed to have known each other for a long time. After they sat down, they began to talk softly. There was no sense of alienation or estrangement between them. The way they whispered to each other made them look like a golden couple. The other two participants from London College also found 2 seats on the 4th floor and sat down. One of the 3 participants from Jerusalem College was an old friend of Gu Han's. Although the 3 participants were wearing the same white robes, the leading swordsman had a soft, curvaceous body that could not be concealed. Especially the pair of breasts that were no smaller than Leslie Dracula's. They bulged up the entire white robe. Second King Yenluo, who was standing beside the cameraman, had the urge to take a bite out of them. Don't even think about it. The clairaudient cameraman did not hesitate to strike back. This is the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem. If you dare touch her, all the sword-bearers in Jerusalem will go crazy and hunt you down, even if you hide in Yanjing City. Holy Maiden. Jerusalem's. Second King Yenluo could not help but shiver when he heard this. What kind of joke was this? Only an idiot would provoke the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem. Unlike the Holy Maiden, who was a little lively in front of Liu Yanling, the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem was as noble as a goddess in heaven. She walked with fixed steps and walked up to the throne like she was dancing. She did not even spare a glance at the other participants sitting on the throne. It was as if she did not care about anything around her. Your Excellency, Holy Maiden, please sit here. This is the only seat where you can pray to the Almighty Allah. The way the 3 people in white robes chose their seats was very unique. They did not choose their seats based on the height of the seat. Instead, they chose the direction in which they could pray to Allah. Among all the seats, the only seats that could be used to pray to Allah were the 4 remaining seats at the bottom. Therefore, after praying to Allah, the 3 people in white robes from Jerusalem sat on the last row. Thus, there was only 1 seat left at the bottom of the throne. No one would have thought that the bottom row, which was usually filled last in previous years, would be almost full in the 5th round. Let's welcome the delegation from Yuzhong University. Last year, Yuzhong City had placed 3rd, so this time they were the 3rd from the bottom. However, unlike the previous 2 academies that had sent 3 representatives, Yuzhong City only had 1 man and 1 woman. Just by looking at the numbers, Yuzhong City had already lost. Master Gu Han, let's sit together, Jin Yujia said seductively as she leaned her body against Gu Han's shoulder. Originally, when she heard that Ku Rakin had become a famed sword-bearer, Jin Yujia felt that this was a sure win. The first place of this year's Elite 8 Academy tournament would not escape Yuzhong City's grasp, and as a treasured sword-bearer, she would most likely be a green leaf that would not play much of a role. Therefore, Jin Yujia knew her limits and gave herself a holiday. These days, she did not train at all in Yanjing City. She only played around non-stop. When she suddenly heard that Ku Rakin had given up the competition yesterday, she panicked and did not know what to do. However, Jin Yujia was a smart woman. When she found that she could not think of a solution to this situation, she simply gave up thinking of a solution and decided to wholeheartedly work for Shui Gohan. This way, even if Yuzhong City lost, it would be Gohan's responsibility, and it would have nothing to do with Jin Yujia. In any case, she only needed to hold on to Gohan for the rest of the competition. Follow me. Gohan nodded and began to climb the throne with Jin Yujia. At first glance, Gohan saw Ashima, the Virgin of Jerusalem, who was sitting in the bottom row. However, seeing that Ashima had no intention of greeting him, Gohan did not pay attention to her. He directly crossed the last row and began to walk to the upper level. The fourth level, which had 4 people, was also ignored by Guhan. The third level, which had a pair of golden boys and jade girls, was also ignored by Guhan. However, Ladya looked at him a few more times. She had a deep impression of this man in front of her. The Emperor's sword, Xianyuan's sword, was taken away by him from Chongyang Mountain. How could Ladya forget this guy? Chapter 807. At this time, most of the audience had already discovered that the few contestants who had appeared earlier were so harmonious that it was scary. Not a single one of them had any thoughts about the throne on the top floor. It was as if the throne had been prepared for someone long ago. This was very scary. This meant that in the hearts of these contestants, there was already a well-deserved first place. At most, they would fight for the second place. Then, who would be the first place? The audience's eyes were hesitant. Would it be the contestant named Guhan? The audience was quite clear about Guhan's information. After all, the incident with the sword pavilion master of Yuzhong City had caused quite a stir. The audience all knew that this sword-bearer named Guhan was the previous sword pavilion master of Yuzhong City, and his disciple was the current sword pavilion master. He was at the pinnacle of power in Yuzhong City. For such a person to participate in a competition for a newcomer swordsman, it felt strange no matter how one looked at it. But in fact, Guhan was indeed a newcomer swordsman. So did this Guhan have the guts to sit on the throne on the top floor? The audience could not help but speculate. It's important to know one's place. Seeing Guhan standing there, Leslie Dracula, who was the first to sit in the second row, said in a somewhat sharp voice, "I know you. Just sit in the second row. The first row is not something you can overstep." Leslie Dracula actually used the word overstep, which meant that in Leslie Dracula's heart, this position had already been occupied by someone, and it seemed to be a matter of course for this person to occupy this position. It was like only the Emperor could sit on the throne, and anyone else sitting on this position was overstepping and committing a capital crime. If people can't overstep, then why did they invent the word overstep? Guhan asked Leslie Dracula expressionlessly. If it had been in the past, Guhan would not have even bothered to ask this question. Leslie Dracula was at a loss for words. She, the little princess who was pampered by others, was indeed very strong, but her EQ was not that good. Facing such a question from Guhan, she pondered for a long time but couldn't give a proper answer. She could only look at Guhan with a face full of bad luck. Her body clearly didn't move, but the huge thing in front of her chest began to tremble. This was the power of her heart. To tell you the truth, this is prepared for Sister Lunyan. You have no right to sit here. Leslie Dracula proudly announced a name, which was transmitted to the ears of everyone in front of the TV through the broadcast. Sister Lunyan? So, it's someone from the Lunyan clan. No wonder the participants aren't interested in the first place. It's the Lunyan clan's successor's turn again. With the Lunyan clan and the myriad sword art, there's no longer any suspense in this competition. F***CK, I bet on the Moscow Academy's champion. I'm doomed. Only now did the audience know that the Lunyan clan's successor would be participating in today's competition. Immediately, there was a flurry of discussion. After hearing the news, everyone in Yanjing believed that the Octagon tournament was in the bag. This was because since ancient times, the Lunyan clan's successor would always be the champion of the Octagon tournament. Their winning rate was 100%, and they had never lost before. Fortunately, the Lunyan clan's successor would only be replaced every 24 years. Otherwise, there would be no suspense in the Octagon tournament. This Guhan can only sit on the second level at most. No one in this world dares to challenge the Lunyan clan's position. The clairaudient cameraman smacked his lips as he spoke to the other cameramen around him. Everyone, including the second king, nodded vigorously. With the Lunyan clan's arrival, there was no longer any suspense in the tournament. The clairaudient cameraman suddenly recalled the second king's performance and asked, "You knew about this long ago, right?" "I only found out this morning." The second king Yenluo shrugged. "But it's a little strange. The descendants of the Lun Yen family will usually be announced a few weeks in advance, and then the bookmakers will remove the bet for the first place and directly bet on which city the second place will be. But this time, it was confirmed early this morning. The bookmakers didn't even have time to remove the bet before the octagon tournament started. I think that's what the bookmakers want. These guys are going to make a fortune this time." The cameraman who bet on the Moscow Academy side. He had spent 3 months' worth of his salary on this bet. According to the current odds, the bookmakers were going to make a fortune. As the cameraman discussed, they dutifully aimed their cameras at the throne. Then, they saw that the sword wielder from Yuzhong City, Gohan, was already sitting in the chosen seat. F***CK. All the cameramen cursed at the same time. That was because Gohan did not hesitate at all. Even though he knew that the Lun Yen clan's successor was going to participate in the octagon tournament, he still sat on the throne at the top. Gohan sat at the highest position on the throne, looking down at everyone below him. "How can you sit here? Get down!" Leslie Dracula roared angrily. Gohan didn't even look at her, treating her as if she didn't exist. You. Leslie Dracula didn't know what to say. Sure enough, the dumber a person was, the more fearless they were. "You don't have to worry about him. This is Miss Ling's problem." Lydia, who had been watching the scene silently, suddenly spoke up. I was wrong. Sister Lydia, you're right. This isn't something I should worry about. Let's leave this annoying fellow to Miss Linlin. Leslie Dracula quickly changed her expression and smiled at Lydia, ending the conversation between her and Gohan. "Lord Gohan, where do you think I should sit?" Jin Yujia, who had been ignored, finally found a chance to speak. After hearing that the Lun Yen clan's successor would appear, this female sword wielder completely lost her composure. She didn't even know where to place her hands, let alone where to sit. "Find a seat closest to me," Gohan said very calmly. Jin Yujia heard Gohan's words and looked around her in a daze. The seat closest to Gohan's first floor was naturally the second, and there happened to be an empty seat on the second floor. Hence, Jin Yujia sat on this seat without any hesitation. She didn't even have time to think. Whoosh! Everyone who saw this scene exploded. The contestants, the audience, the cameramen, and even the senior sword-bearers who hid themselves on the viewing platform were all surprised. Wasn't the Yuzhong University delegation a little too arrogant? There were only 2 contestants left, but they actually occupied the top 2 seats in one go. Could it be that in the eyes of the people of Yuzhong City, they had the ability to suppress Yenjing Academy, which had the descendant of the Lun Yen clan, and become the champion of the 8 Academy tournament? If this was really the case, then the Yuzhong University delegation had really created unprecedented history. Compared to the silent thoughts of the senior sword-bearers, the ordinary people had already exploded. Some of the more irascible ones even began to curse. As for what they cursed, there was no need to write it out. In any case, it was just some unpleasant words. There was only one core meaning. Yuzhong City didn't know what was good for them and didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. When the time came, Yenjing City would definitely make these Yuzhong City people forget how to write the word lose. Let's welcome the Moscow University delegation. The next to appear was the Moscow University, the second place last year and the hottest candidate for the championship today. Unfortunately, because of the descendant of the Lun Yen clan, they instantly fell from being a candidate for the championship to the runner-up. The Moscow University delegation was a group of 2 men and 1 woman. The 2 people walking behind were obviously a pair of twins. Apart from their hairstyles and breasts, they looked exactly the same in almost every other aspect. It was as if they were carved from the same mold. It had to be admitted that the Muscovites had a strong racial talent. The pair of twins looked exactly the same, but with a different hairstyle and breasts. They perfectly illustrated what the most handsome man and the most beautiful woman should look like. Unlike the pair of dragon and phoenix siblings, the short blonde youth standing in front of them seemed a little inconspicuous. Apart from his golden hair that was even more dazzling than gold, there was nothing memorable about him. He was just like an ordinary boy from an ordinary family in Moscow. At most, he had the characteristics of a Shota. But if you looked closely, you would be able to find that this boy's eyes were different from everyone else's. This boy's eyes would emit a light blue light that was like a serenade. Other people's pupils would also emit light, but their pupils would emit light because of reflection, which came from other sources of light. But this Russian Shota's pupils emitted light from his pupils. His pupils were a source of light. Ivan Andreyevich Romanov. The clairaudient cameraman let out a long sigh. The great bloodline of the Tsar is now only this one. I hope he can continue the prestige of the Tsar. Chapter 808. The Romanov Dynasty, the last dynasty of Tsarist Russia. It was said that all the members of the Tsarist royal family, including Nicholas II, died in the hands of Lenin. However, after the apocalypse, a man who claimed to be a descendant of the Romanov dynasty rose to power. He led a brave and unyielding fighting nation in the frozen land of Siberia, where even Yuan Ko could not stay. Finally, he ascended to the throne and was known as the God of Thunder Gyendi. Later, he established the Moscow base city, which became the only base city among the 8 base cities that did not receive any assistance from Yenjing City. Although the highest leader of the Moscow base city was also known as the chairman of the Sword Committee, in the Moscow base city, they often wanted to call themselves the Tsar. The founder of the Moscow base city, the God of Thunder Gyendi, was good at everything except for one bad thing. He liked to have promiscuous sex, and promiscuous sex at that. In the end, when he died, he left behind a total of 168 descendants. Please note that these 168 descendants did not include his grandchildren. These 168 descendants were all his sons. After hundreds of years of development in the Moscow base city, a strange situation appeared. That was, more than 80% of the population in the Moscow base city had the surname Romanov, and all of them were descendants of this Gyendi. The Romanov family was also known as the largest family in the entire human race. It was unknown whether it was a punishment for the Romanov family's fertility, but after the God of Thunder Gyendi, there was no more Gyendi in the Moscow base city. The highest level sword bearer was only a sword bearer of the immortal sword tier. Therefore, there were such rumors in other base cities that the Moscow base city was punished by the Sword Lady because of their incest, punishing their descendants to never have a Gyendi again. Although there was no more Gyendi in the Moscow base city, one should not underestimate them because of this. The Romanov family was known as a fighting family. Every man with the surname Romanov was the best warrior in the world. They were also the city with the highest number of sword masters other than Yenjing City. The sword immortals in their city were often the most powerful sword immortals. Every time the 8 Academies tournament was held, Moscow was always in the top 3. The number of times they won second place was second only to Yenjing City. Moscow base had even produced a peerless swordsman who could exchange a few hundred blows with Gyendi. This was a unique achievement in history. Even Zha the Heavens Gyendi couldn't achieve this. It was hard to believe that the young man with blonde hair in front of the TV cameras was actually Ivan Andreyevich Romanov, who had shone brilliantly in the defense of Moscow base city not long ago. The Moscow base city was under attack at almost the same time as the Yuzhong base city. But unlike Yuzhong City, which was in a miserable state, the city of Moscow kept the enemy outside the city walls from the beginning to the end. At the most difficult time of the battle, 3 U-level Yuan Ko launched an all-out attack on Moscow base city at the same time. At one point, the dimensional barrier was broken due to lack of energy. Yuan Ko's army began to attack the city gate of Moscow Bay City. And before that, the unknown Ivan Andreevich Romanov, later referred to as Andreevich, actually took the lead and intercepted hundreds of Ghost level, Soul level, Flood Dragon level, and Dragon level Yuan Ko's army. In 30 minutes, he killed more than 100 Yuan Kos. Yuan Ko, who had always been unafraid of death, actually felt fear and took the initiative to escape. This matter sounded quite simple, but in fact it was like a myth. Because at that time, Andreevich wasn't a famous sword-level swordsman, but only a treasure sword-level swordsman. With the strength of a treasure sword-level swordsman, he was able to intercept the Yuan Ko's army that was hundreds of times stronger than him. This could no longer be described as a genius. In history, there were only a few people who had such a battle record besides Kanzu and Zhetianjiandi. Oh right, not long ago there was also Gohan. He also killed hundreds of Yuan Kos by himself when he was a treasure sword-level swordsman. But Gohan was our protagonist. Could it be that Andreevich also had the protagonist's halo? No matter what, since then, Andreevich became famous and became the hero of Moscow. Some people even listed Andreevich as one of the Tsar's princes, giving him the qualification to fight for the throne of the Tsar of Moscow. Andreevich had also absorbed a large amount of sword essence with the help of the massive amount of Yuan Ho he had killed in this battle. He had become a famous sword-bearer in one leap and led the Moscow Academy's contestants to the arena of the Astral Tournament. This sword-level swordsman who was merciless on the battlefield and killed people like scything flax unexpectedly showed a bit of shyness in front of countless cameras. He first looked at the seat on the first floor and found that it was already occupied by Gohan. Even when there was no seat on the second floor, Andreevich did not show any displeasure. He brought the twin swordsmen behind him to the third floor, where there were still 2 empty seats. The audience thought that Andreevich would take a seat on the third floor and leave the last seat for the descendant of the Lunyan family. Unexpectedly, Andreevich did not take the seat on the third floor. Instead, he let the twin swordsmen behind him take the 2 seats on the third floor, while he took the seat on the fourth floor with a smile on his face. It was as if the seat on the fourth floor was not an insult to his strength. Although Andreevich humbly sat on the seat on the fourth floor, the situation on the throne was very awkward. The first 3 floors of the throne were already occupied. There were only 4 empty seats on the 4th and 5th floor. This meant that the representatives from Yenjing Academy could only sit on the 4th or 5th floor. In the past, no matter how strong the other representatives were, they would at least leave a seat on the 3rd floor for the representatives from Yenjing Academy. Not to mention that the descendant of the Lun Yen family was participating in the competition. The top throne was reserved for Yenjing City. No one dared to sit on it. "This is going to be fun. Miss Lunyan, you must teach this Yuzhanggai a lesson. Let him know that not everyone can sit on the first seat." The audience discussed among themselves, but most of their discussions were about Gohan. Gohan was the one who snatched the seat from Yenjing City. Let's welcome the representatives from the host, Yenjing Academy. It was finally the turn of the host, Yenjing City. 3 figures appeared on the stage. The other 2 were not worth paying attention to, as they were not important characters. Most importantly, there was a girl with a gloomy expression who walked at the front. This was the first time Gohan saw Liuyan Ling in the past 10 days. Liuyan Ling seemed to be a lot unhappy compared to before. Liuyan Ling kept her head lowered, not allowing the cameras to capture her face. However, Liuyan Ling walked straight to the front of the throne and walked up to the highest seat. She stood in front of Gohan, who was seated on the throne at the top. The couple had not seen each other for a long time. "Why?" Liuyan Ling finally raised her head. However, it was only then that Gohan noticed that there seemed to be tears in Liuyan Ling's eyes. Gohan did not speak. He did not know what Liuyan Ling was asking about. Clearly, the Lunyan family was not willing to let Liuyan Ling stay with him. Therefore, they would definitely try their best to erase Gohan's image in Liuyan Ling's heart. Clearly, the Lunyan family had said something to Liuyan Ling, causing Liuyan to be filled with hatred towards Gohan. It was as if Gohan had done something wrong to her. However, Gohan did not want to explain anything, nor could he explain anything. This was because Gohan had already made a deal with the fleeting wooden fish when he took the 12,000 cubic centimeters of imperial blood. The two parties did not say anything about the deal. They did not even mention Liuyan Ling's name. However, Gohan understood the fleeting wooden fish's intentions. The fleeting wooden fish wanted to use the 12,000 cubic centimeters of imperial blood to exchange for Gohan, not to accept Liuyan Ling's feelings. This was actually a very unfair deal. The fleeting wooden fish had hidden this move from Liuyan Ling, and it had almost caused Qi Dian's revival to go up in smoke. However, Gohan had succeeded in the end. This meant that Gohan had no choice but to accept this deal. Before Gohan had the strength to contend against the Lunyan family, this deal had to be accepted. Otherwise, the Lunyan family would teach Gohan a lesson about what a fair deal was. You're not worthy of this seat. You'll fall. Liuyan Ling gave Gohan one last deep look. She turned around without hesitation in front of Gohan, and brought her two subordinates to sit on the fourth seat. According to the rules of the throne, once a seat was chosen, it could only be adjusted through a competition. No one, including herself, could change the seat. All participants, please take note. The first day of the Great Astral Tournament has officially begun. As the host's voice sounded, the Great Astral Tournament began without any warm-up. The first round of the exam, World Culture, the host said. Then, a table automatically rose in front of these thrones. On the table, there was a stack of test papers, 3 pens, and a cup filled with tea. Yes, that's right. The first exam was not about anything else. It was a real exam. It was a test that required the use of the pen in the hand to answer questions. It was a test that lasted for a whole 24 hours. Chapter 809. According to the statistics of uncertain historical data, it was discovered that humans before the apocalypse seemed to be very good at taking exams. They were extremely talented and had a huge hobby in this area. They would start practicing taking exams from a young age, and would need at least 9 years of practice. Almost every child before the apocalypse loved taking exams, which was beneficial to their physical and mental health. Every day they would study how to get high marks on exams. From the age of 7, according to incomplete data, it was 3 for some humans. They would formally enter school to take exams. Every day they would study around the clock for exams, learning things that they would not need in the future. For example, the English exam. Research showed that 85% of children would not need to use English for more than a day after they reached adulthood. But just for this one day, these 85% of children would spend at least 9 years on learning English. At first, humans after the apocalypse did not understand this. Later on, they understood that learning English was only for the sake of getting high marks on exams. Getting high marks was the fundamental goal of these children. It was indeed a very noble and beneficial hobby, one that was free from vulgar interests. Moreover, it was said that before the Great Calamity, humans had gone through a long period of examination training, and everyone's examination ability was extremely abnormal. 2 sheets of paper filled with densely packed numbers could actually be solved in just over 2 hours. They could understand many very simple articles with profound meanings that even the original authors could not understand. The most impressive was the political exam. Even though these people would be supervised by officials for the rest of their lives, they could memorize XXX ideology, XXX theory, XXX representative, XXX honor, and XXX disgrace more skillfully than the officials, to the extent that they could recite them backward. There were even many people whose only interest in life was taking exams. After studying for 9 years, they were still not satisfied and wanted to take the exams again. And these 9 years were not the limit. As long as humans before the apocalypse were interested, they could easily take the exams for 13 years, 15 years, 19 years, 25 years. Even if they took the exams for the rest of their lives, it did not matter. After all, they did not know what else they could do in this life. It was a pity that humans after the apocalypse did not inherit these fine traditions. Apart from a comprehensive exam for graduation, ordinary people did not need to take any other exams. For most humans after the apocalypse, a simple equation would take them 10 minutes to solve. A 600-word essay would take a few hours to write. In any case, humans after the Great Calamity weren't good at exams. They couldn't even compare to 1% of the humans before the Great Calamity. What was even more terrifying was that the test papers placed in front of all the participants were not just 1 or 2 simple test papers, but a total of 20 test papers stacked on top of each other. The content of these test papers was very broad, summarized under the name of world culture. In reality, it included 8 main subjects: mathematics, history, language, physics, swordsman, swordmistress, yuan ko, and society. This was already a very simplified subject, unlike those ordinary people who aspired to become scientists, who still had to take extremely complicated subjects like quantum mechanics, biology, chemistry, and so on. The 8 subjects listed here were the knowledge that a sword wielder must master. Considering that there were a lot of questions, the organizing committee of the 8 Academies tournament gave these participants 24 hours to answer the questions. To finish 20 papers in 24 hours, an average of 1.2 hours for each paper seemed to be a lot of time. It had to be known that a mathematics exam with 2 full answers would only last 2 hours, and the number of questions on each test paper could not be compared with the density of questions in the mathematics exam papers before the apocalypse. But these 24 hours were already very stressful for humans after the apocalypse. In addition to those true top students, there was also the need for sleep. Most ordinary people often needed more than 72 hours to finish these papers. Although these sword-bearers were the top figures in their respective academies, ranking in the top 3 of their academies, they were top students in terms of combat, but they were poor in terms of cultural knowledge. Many people couldn't even get 100 points in the comprehensive exam. The total score was 1,000 points. And according to statistics, the stronger the participants, the weaker their ability to take the exam. There was a certain scientific basis for the so-called all brawn and no brains. So in many cases, when the first round of the 8 Academies tournament ended 24 hours later, there were still many sword-bearers who hadn't even finished answering half of the questions, and most of the questions that had been answered were less than 50% correct. This exam was simply a huge torture for all the participants, leaving a huge psychological shadow in many of them. For example, when Yongquan Jiendi took the exam when he was young, he miserably got the last place. Yongquan Jiendi was so angry that he swore to God that if he could ascend to the throne one day, he would force the 8 Academies tournament to remove this terrible exam item. But the dramatic thing was that after Yongquan Jiendi really became Jiendi, he excitedly encouraged the 8 Academies tournament's organizing committee to increase the weight of the exam. The number of papers should be increased, the difficulty of the questions should be increased, and even the difficulty of the questions should be increased. This made the juniors who took the exam later complain incessantly, and they instinctively trembled at the sight of the papers. Even Yuan Ko was not so afraid. Before the official exam, all the participants had one more step to complete. They had to drink a cup of tea in front of them. Don't underestimate this cup of tea. It was said that it was a magical liquid diluted by scientists, called chuha soup. This chuha soup had no other ability. Its only function was to isolate the connection between the sword-bearer and the Purple Mansion, so that the sword-bearer could not secretly talk to the sword lady through the Purple Mansion. According to folk rumors, if the chuha soup was drunk without dilution, the effect would not be as simple as making the sword-bearer unable to talk to the sword lady in the purple mansion. This kind of medicinal liquid could directly and completely seal the purple mansion for a long time. Not only could the sword-bearer not talk to the sword lady, but they also could not release the sword lady to fight. This was equivalent to putting a handcuff on the sword-bearer, completely sealing the sword-bearer's combat effectiveness. In the case that there was no antidote for this kind of liquid, it could only be slowly dissolved by time. This time could be 1 day or it could be 10 years. However, the Sword Committee had always denied this rumor, nor did they admit that this liquid had the effect of making the sword-bearer lose his combat ability. This kind of thing was really too terrifying. If someone used it on a large scale, perhaps all the sword-bearers in the base city would have to wear handcuffs. The reason why the sword-bearers were allowed to drink the diluted chuha soup was very simple. It was to prevent the sword-bearers from cheating. These questions might be very difficult for the sword-bearers, but for the sword lady who had lived for 1,000 years, it was not difficult at all. In a certain exam, the sword-bearer used the power of the sword lady to obtain first place, and this method of cheating was quickly blocked. After drinking the chuha soup, the sword-bearers could only open the exam papers in front of them. Then, the expressions on the sword-bearers' faces became very strange. Some of the sword-bearers who were previously smiling mischievously now looked as if they had eaten hundreds of bitter gourds. Some of the sword-bearers who were cold and expressionless had their facial muscles constantly tremble as if they had Parkinson's disease. After 40 minutes of long-distance shooting, under the control of the cameraman, the camera began to give close-up shots of the main contestants in each city. The first to enter the audience's line of sight was Lydia, the cutest blonde loli. Her nose and eyes were almost squeezed together in pain. She instinctively ate the ends of her double ponytails into her mouth and kept biting the poor blonde hair hard, just like those examinees who kept biting the end of their pens while thinking in the exam. The second close-up shot was of the blonde boy, Andreevich. Contrary to the blonde lowly Lydia, Andreevich was very calm and indifferent. There was even a faint smile on his face. Although the pen in his hand would sometimes freeze, most of the time, it moved very smoothly. Obviously, most of these exam questions were not difficult for this blonde boy. Many of the audience who saw this scene were very puzzled. Wasn't the Romanov family rich in warriors with brains full of muscles? This Andreevich could fight hundreds of Yuan Ko and even killed hundreds of them. Shouldn't he be a beast among beasts, a man with muscles among muscles? How could he answer the questions so smoothly? Next was the skeleton trio from Los Angeles. There was nothing much to say about their performance. It was very, very normal. These 3 children who grew up in an orphanage naturally couldn't have much cultural knowledge. Each of them was scratching their ears and cheeks anxiously like baboons in heat. They couldn't wait to steal a glance at the exam papers of the people around them. Unfortunately, each of them was being watched by more than a dozen cameras at the same time. Once they made any small movements, they would be discovered immediately. The fourth close-up shot was of Leslie Dracula, who kept banging the table hard, seemingly annoyed by these difficult questions. The fifth close-up shot was of a skinny bespectacled boy from London. He was also embarrassed, and it was obvious that he was no different from Lydia, who was next to him. The sixth was of Ashma, the saintess of Jerusalem. Well, under the protection of a white robe and veil, the audience couldn't even see what the saintess looked like, let alone her expression. They could only judge that this saintess seemed to be at an average level from her pen that would stop moving from time to time. The seventh was of Liunian Ling. The close-up shot only shook for 2 seconds before it quickly moved away. But the sharp-eyed audience still noticed that the successor of the Liunian family, the hope of Yenjing City, did not seem to have any movement to answer the questions. Instead, her eyes were slightly red and swollen, filled with tears. The last close-up shot was of Gohan, and then the audience was shocked. This was because less than 20 seconds after the close-up shot, Guhan suddenly slapped the side of his table hard, and then the exam papers on the table were sucked into a void door. Obviously, it was taken away by the immortal sword wielder in charge of invigilating the exam. God, it was less than an hour before the exam began, and this Guhan had actually handed in the exam papers. This pretentiousness is amazing. The audience was full of praise. Chapter 8:10. In just an hour Guhan had finished writing all 20 test papers. However, according to the rules of the exam, even if the test papers had been handed in, the contestants could not leave the throne. They had to stay there until the end of the competition. Therefore, Guhan immediately sat cross-legged on his throne at the top and began to cultivate the sword energy in his body. Anyway, the throne was big enough, just like the dragon throne in ancient times. Even if one lay on it, it would not feel small, let alone sit on it and meditate. For the audience, there was no appreciation value at all in taking the exam for 24 hours. Therefore, there was no such thing as a live audience for the first day of the 8 Academies tournament. There was only one television channel that maintained a 24-hour live broadcast. If one was interested in understanding the process of the competition, he could only watch the entire competition through the live broadcast. Therefore, at this time in the martial arts arena, apart from the 23 contestants who were suffering, there were only the cameramen in the cameraman's area who were suffering as well. However, the days of the cameramen were a little more comfortable than the contestants because they worked in 3 shifts. Every 8 hours the cameraman would change shift. Naturally, they did not have to be like the 23 contestants who were constantly exposed to the cold winter wind. After eating 2 working meals sent by the organizing committee, it was gradually night time. The sky darkened earlier in winter. It was only around 6:30 p.m., and the sky was already completely dark. Only the position of the throne was lit up, illuminating the test papers written by the contestants. Achoo! It's so cold. Leslie Dracula sneezed loudly and then could not help but hug her arms. Winter nights were naturally cold. At this time, the outdoor temperature had already dropped to about 2 degrees Celsius. If it was a little later, the temperature might drop below 0 degrees Celsius, which was a temperature that could freeze water into ice. The throne was placed in the huge, empty martial arts arena, and there was no shelter around it. The cold winter wind continued to wreak havoc around the contestants, freezing them like dogs. Especially Leslie Dracula, a girl who loved to be beautiful. In order to pursue beauty, she especially wore a very light tulle evening dress. Although Leslie Dracula's maid had advised her to wear a thick down jacket countless times in the morning, Leslie Dracula had refused on the grounds that she was a famed swordsman. She was a famed sword-level sword wielder, and had the physical qualities of a famed sword-level swordswoman. How could she possibly catch a cold? But Leslie Dracula forgot that she still had to drink the chuha soup before the exam. In the case of isolating the connection between her Zifu and the main body, Leslie Dracula's body was no different from an ordinary person. Although his physical fitness had been enhanced, so it was unlikely that he would get sick like a cold. There would not be any changes to his sense of warmth. Leslie Dracula looked at the contestants in front of her and found that they were all wearing thick down jackets. Obviously, they were prepared. Only she and Jean Yujia, who was beside her, wore thin clothes because they loved to be beautiful and fell into the state of being frozen like dogs. After a while, Leslie Dracula felt that her hand holding the pen was almost frozen. At this moment, she suddenly heard continuous sounds coming from above her. She turned her head and saw that Guhan, who had been meditating, had unknowingly changed his posture and was lying on the top of the throne. Lying down was lying down, there was nothing to be envious about. But the problem was that Guhan wasn't lying on the chair wearing thin clothes, but was lying there with a thick layer of quilt. What was even more infuriating was that Guhan had tied a small quilt on his head, leaving only 2 nostrils and a pair of eyes outside. The rest of his body was tightly wrapped. Just looking at it made people feel extremely warm. How can he take out a quilt? That's right, he has already finished answering the questions. He can drink the antidote to Chuha soup, so the seal on his purple mansion has been removed. Leslie Dracula was filled with jealousy. After drinking the diluted Chuha soup, the ability of the sword holder to use the dimensional pocket was naturally also sealed. But after handing in the paper, he could obtain the antidote to Chuha soup and regain the ability of the sword holder, so Gohan could take out his thick quilt from his dimensional pocket. That's right, I don't know if I can ask him for a piece of clothing. Leslie Dracula suddenly had such an idea. Every sword holder's dimensional pocket would store a large amount of resources, and clothes of various seasons were naturally no exception. She could ask Gohan for a thick piece of clothing to wear, so that she would have a much better night. But Leslie Dracula didn't know if doing so would violate the exam rules. If this would be judged as cheating by the examiner, then she would be at a loss. There were many contestants who had the same idea as Leslie Dracula, but they were also a little hesitant because they didn't know if doing so would violate the exam rules. Here you go. Suddenly, Leslie Dracula saw a thick piece of clothing fly to her side, and she was immediately overjoyed. Could it be that this man knew the principle of having tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex? But before Leslie Dracula could finish being happy, this thick piece of clothing was grabbed by Jean Yujia, who was sitting next to her, and she quickly put it on. How dare you, bitch! Leslie Dracula was about to jump up and fight with Jean Yujia, who dared to snatch her clothes, but she heard Jean Yujia say to Gohan, "Thank you, sir. No need, I guess that you didn't prepare any clothes, so I bought one for you before the competition started," Gohan said faintly, which made Leslie Dracula blush greatly. It seemed that this piece of clothing was specially prepared for Jean Yujia. This was not surprising. After all, they were from the same academy, so they naturally had to help each other. "But sir, is it really okay to take something from you and give it to me? Won't this be considered cheating?" Jean Yujia asked weakly. Hearing this question, Leslie Dracula, who was freezing, also pricked up her ears at the same time. "Haven't you done your homework in advance?" Gohan sighed. In the 8 Academies tournament 12 years ago, there were contestants who finished answering the questions in advance and gave the clothes in their dimensional pockets to their companions. The organizing committee didn't have any reaction, so it won't be considered cheating. Don't worry. Okay. Only then did Jean Yujia feel completely relieved. She happily put on the thick coat and immediately felt a lot warmer. Seeing this scene, Leslie Dracula instantly felt that the temperature around her seemed to have dropped by more than 10 degrees, and her bones were about to be frozen into ice cubes. He must have other clothes on him. Why don't I ask him for one? Leslie Dracula thought weakly in her heart. But she had just quarreled with this annoying man. If she asked him for clothes now, wouldn't she be slapping her own face? But if she didn't want it, she might not have the worst night of her life. It was probably a night that she would never forget for the rest of her life. Just when Leslie Dracula was struggling to decide whether she should ask Gohan, she suddenly felt a piece of clothing on her shoulder, and her body suddenly seemed to be a lot warmer. This is a down jacket. Leslie Dracula was completely surprised. When did she have a down jacket on her? Put it on. This is a gift for you. Gohan's faint voice came from behind Leslie Dracula. She never expected that when she was still struggling to ask Gohan for a piece of clothing, Gohan would actually take the initiative to give it to her. This was really a timely help. Thank you. Leslie Dracula quickly put on the down jacket, and a huge wave of warmth moved her whole body. For the first time in her life, she sincerely thanked a man. However, men were really lascivious animals. Sure enough, they were still subdued by her beauty. The Dracula family has sacrificed a lot for mankind. For their sake, I can't let you freeze. Leslie Dracula, who was in a self-congratulatory mood, was suddenly depressed by Gohan's words. It turned out that he gave her the clothes for the sake of her family, and it had nothing to do with her beauty. This was really terrible. Although her mood was still a little bad, Leslie Dracula answered the questions very smoothly. When she finished her 19th paper, the voice of the host, which had been there for a long time, pulled her out of the sea of knowledge. The time now is midnight. It turned out that this was the voice that announced the time, telling all the respondents that it was already midnight, and there were only 8 hours left before the final answer. I can sleep for 6 hours, and the remaining 2 hours will be enough to finish the last paper. Leslie Dracula's 2 eyelids were constantly fighting. Whether it was the huge number of questions or the cold wind, both consumed a lot of her brain power. In the past, Leslie Dracula would not feel sleepy even if she fought until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but now she was extremely sleepy. Looking at the other contestants, it seemed that half of them had also fallen asleep. Therefore, after comforting herself for a while, Leslie Dracula wrapped herself in the down jacket that Gohan gave her and slowly fell asleep. However, she did not sleep deeply. In her half-asleep state, she seemed to notice that Gohan, who was lying behind her, got up and left for a while, and then returned to his position. She did not know what he did. Chapter 8:11. Bring me my underwear. Leslie Dracula, who was sleeping soundly on the chair, muttered to herself. She didn't know who this Jar was and why she was helping her get her underwear. But after saying this, Leslie Dracula quickly woke up from her sleep. When she opened her eyes, she let out a loud scream. Test paper, where's my test paper? Leslie Dracula cried out when she discovered that her test paper was gone. It's been taken away. The 3 skeleton brothers walked to Leslie Dracula's side and looked at her large breasts lecherously. Big sister, is your opie real? You're the one who's fake, you pervert. Leslie Dracula blushed and kicked at the 3 skeleton brothers. However, she didn't expect her body to be a bit numb from curling up in the chair. She tripped on the chair and was about to fall onto the throne. Be careful. A white and slender hand supported Leslie Dracula's body. However, don't think too much about it. Gohan wasn't that kind. Miss Ling. Leslie Dracula was very excited to see Liunian Ling. Her eyes were filled with longing. This was very normal. The successor of the Liunian aristocratic family was the dream of every swordsman. Even swordsman from the Sword Emperor family was no exception. You guys back off. Don't bully a girl, Liunian Ling said to the 3 skeleton brothers. However, they were different from the majority of sword-bearers who were born as ordinary people, as well as the children of aristocratic families like Leslie Dracula from the Emperor's sword clan. The 3 skeleton brothers were the most unruly swordsmen from the orphanage. They believed in the law of the jungle, paying particular attention to the strong as the king. It was impossible for anyone to rely on their name to make the 3 skeleton brothers retreat if they didn't show their true ability. Haha! I heard that the might of the Lun Yen clan's billion sword art is unparalleled. You should be able to fight 100 million by yourself. The 3 of us don't know what's good for us. Let's experience the Lun Yen family's moves in advance. As the 3 skeleton brothers spoke, they actually wanted to attack Liunian Ling. Liunian Ling's eyes flashed, and she clenched her fists. Just as she was about to make a move, another fist struck first. The 3 skeleton brothers were sent flying like 3 sandbags. They fell at the bottom of the throne and ate their mouths. Who asked you to make a move? Liunian Ling did not appreciate Gohan's help at all. She glared at Gohan and said, Who asked you to make a move? I don't like the 3 of them. Can't I? Gohan snorted. This was the first thing he said to Liunian Ling since they met again. Of course you can, Liunian Ling said through gritted teeth. Then, she took off her windbreaker and threw it in front of Gohan. When I was young, I had to swim in the Siberian winter every year. This bit of cold is nothing. I don't need your fake affection. As long as you're happy. Guhan bent down and touched the trench coat. Then, the trench coat was put back into his dimensional pocket. When he stood up again, Liuyan Ling had already returned to her seat. She did not look at Guhan anymore. There's something wrong here. Leslie Dracula used her female instinct to gossip. She quickly discovered that Miss Ling and Guhan seemed to have a very ordinary story. Just as Leslie Dracula was about to further imagine the story between Guhan and Liuyan Ling, Ladia suddenly appeared in front of her. What did you find last night? Ladia whispered into Leslie Dracula's ear as soon as she arrived. What did you find last night? Speaking of last night's incident, Leslie Dracula remembered the down jacket she was wearing. Then, her face turned red. She thought that Ladia had discovered the extra down jacket on her, and wanted to interrogate her about the origin of the down jacket. Of course, it's the person behind you. Didn't you notice that his relationship with Miss Ling is a little weird? Ladia blinked her eyes. I'm only telling you. He met me and Miss Ling once 2 months ago. They were very close at that time. They even slept in the same tent. What? You said the two of them slept in the same tent? Leslie Dracula covered her mouth. This was big news. Could it be that Miss Ling, whom everyone has their eyes on, is already taken? Isn't this a little too fast? That's why I'm asking you. What did the person behind you do last night? Did he do anything strange? Why do I feel that the two of them are about to become enemies now? Ladia said in confusion. Enemies are good, enemies are good. Leslie Dracula muttered to herself. Then, her face turned red again. She immediately changed the topic. By the way, I can't find my test paper. Do you know who moved my test paper? What test paper? Of course, it was taken away. Ladia looked at her strangely. I saw you sleeping after I woke up. Don't tell me you went to sleep without finishing the test paper. Why? Can't I finish it after I wake up? Please, then wake up early. It's almost 9 o'clock now. In order to get the most accurate results, the 23 contestants' test papers were manually graded by 3 different teachers. It took them 2 hours to grade the 23 test papers. Immediately, the results of the first round of the exam were announced. There were no boring exams, and today's schedule was full of fierce battles. Therefore, compared with the empty martial arts field yesterday, today's martial arts field was already full of spectators. More people began to watch the grand occasion of this competition through the live broadcast on TV. There were more machines and cameramen in the cameraman's area. The number was 3 times more than yesterday. Now, the results will be announced. Corresponding results will be rewarded with corresponding points. Once your results can't match your position on the throne, you will immediately be disqualified. The host's voice was cold. This also meant that the first round of elimination of the Elite 8 Academies tournament had begun. Big Brother, what does the host mean? What exactly is this rule? Yesterday's second-generation heir gathered with the cameraman again. But today, he didn't bring his voluptuous girlfriend with him. Instead, he came alone. You brat, you don't even know the rules and came here to watch the competition. The clairaudient cameraman rolled his eyes at the second-generation heir and then began to explain. There are a total of 5 rounds of the Elite 8 Academies tournament. The first round is an elimination round. The 9 contestants on the 5th level will be eliminated. The people on the 5th level will be eliminated? Didn't they choose their position on the throne? Then what's the point of the competition? The second-generation heir was even more puzzled. Who told you that once you choose the throne, it will not change? The clairaudient cameraman patiently explained. The results will be announced later. The first to be eliminated are those who overestimate themselves and don't know their position. For example, that Yuzhong guy sitting on the top floor. He felt good when he chose that seat yesterday, but his head has to be worthy of his ass. If he doesn't get first place today, even if he only gets second place, One person from his delegation will be immediately eliminated. Do you understand? After some explanation, the second-generation heir finally understood the somewhat complicated rules of the first round. To put it bluntly, choosing the position of the throne was a huge foreshadowing. It tested the sword-bearer's perception of their own strength. If you felt that you were number one in the world, you had to have the strength to be number one in the world. Otherwise, even if you were number two in the world, you would still be the first to be kicked off the throne among the 23 people. Gohan had chosen the throne on the top floor, so he had to get first place in every round. Otherwise, he would be forced to leave. However, considering that the participating academies were a whole group, and that some academies could only admit defeat if they lost their trump card, the participating academies could choose whether to sacrifice the qualifications of others to protect that person. The participating academies could choose whether to sacrifice the qualifications of others to protect this person's qualifications. For example, if Gohan didn't get first place and was asked to leave, but Gohan was the only one in Yuzhong City who could fight, then Gohan could negotiate with Jin Yujia to let Jin Yujia replace him and leave while Gohan would sit on Jin Yujia's throne. If the results of the first 4 rows were announced and more than 9 people were eliminated, then all of them would be eliminated. If there were less than 9 people, then the last 3 people on the 5th level would be eliminated. In any case, at least 9 people had to be eliminated, not one less. The clairaudient cameraman explained the rules, and the results were officially announced. The order of the results was the same as yesterday's. The first to be announced was the results of the University of Buenos Aires, which was the results of Leslie Dracula and her 2 classmates. Junior Bush, 356 points, 18th place. Senior Bush, 344 points, 19th place. The first to be announced were the scores and rankings of Leslie Dracula's 2 classmates. They were 18th and 19th place respectively, which was in line with the order they had chosen. They were both the last 9 positions on the 5th level. They wouldn't be eliminated for the time being. Leslie Dracula, 758 points, 4th place. Then there was Leslie Dracula's score. It was obvious that she had been eliminated. Chapter 8:12. D** eminent, D** eminent, D** eminent. Leslie Dracula screamed in her heart. She hated herself. She hated herself for not finishing the last test paper before going to bed. She hated herself for sleeping so soundly that she did not wake up until 8 o'clock in the morning the next day. She did not even finish one of the test papers. Otherwise, she would have been able to get into the 3rd place. Leslie Dracula was sitting on the 2nd level. According to the rules, she had to get into the top 3. Originally, Leslie Dracula was very confident about her result. She was the member of the Dracula family with the best exam ability in the history of the family. She thought that with her ability, she could easily get into the top 3 or even the 1st place in the first round. However, because she did not finish the last damn test paper, Leslie Dracula fell 1 place behind and became the 4th place. She was also the first contestant to be eliminated. It was a tragic sight. Request for a replacement. Bush, who was sitting on the lowest level, suddenly stood up. He raised his hand and said to the host, "I request to replace Miss Leslie Dracula's place with my place." Agreed to the replacement. Bush is eliminated. Leslie Dracula will sit on the empty seat on the 5th level. The host replied coldly. If there was an unexpected change, he would have to sacrifice his teammate. Therefore, Bush, who was also ranked 18th in the University of Buenos Aires, could only choose to be eliminated and give his place to Leslie Dracula. Otherwise, once the University of Buenos Aires lost its own famous sword-bearer, it would end up at the bottom of the 8 academies, just like last year. This was not a situation that the University of Buenos Aires and the Dracula family wanted to see. "I'm sorry," Leslie Dracula said to Bush. Then, she quietly stood up and vacated the 2nd level seat. She then sat on the last level, which originally belonged to Bush. See that? This is called not knowing one's place. The clairaudient cameraman said sarcastically to the second king Yen Luo, "Actually, this Dracula family girl isn't that bad. She's in 4th place after all. It's just that she miscalculated by 1 place." Later, you'll see the guy from Yuzhang who thinks he can get the 1st place roll off the stage. Oh right, his teammate seems to be sitting on the 2nd floor too. Maybe the two of them will roll off together, and Yuzhang City will probably be eliminated in 1 round. Obama, 298 points, 20th place. O'Neill, 278 points, 21st place. Olaf, 248 points, 22nd place. After the University of Buenos Aires, it was the turn of the 3 skeleton brothers from the University of Los Angeles. As expected of contestants from the underworld, their results were very fitting of their identities. Apart from the last place, they occupied all the last 3 places. This was a very dangerous situation. If the number of eliminated contestants in the upper 4 floors didn't exceed 7, then one of the 3 skeleton brothers would have to be eliminated. If the number of eliminated contestants didn't exceed 4, then the 3 skeleton brothers would all be eliminated. However, the 3 of them didn't have much of a change in their expressions after hearing their result. They were still laughing. Obviously, this result was within their expectations. They were very self-aware. Munich, 513 points, 9th place. Rubai, 515 points, 10th place. Next up were the 2 students from the Berlin College. They were sitting on the 4th floor and had accurately estimated their positions. It was already certain that they wouldn't be eliminated in the 1st round. The next most important thing was their ace, Ladia. If Ladia didn't get in the top 7, then Ladia would be eliminated. They would then have to do what Bush did just now and give up their position to the ace of their college, lest they lose their backbone in the later battles. Ladia Adolf, 600 points, 7th place. Ladia finally let out a long sigh of relief when she heard her own result. Although she mysteriously stayed in the 7th place, it was still the 7th place. This meant that all the contestants from the Berlin College, including Ladia, had safely passed the 1st round of the competition and successfully stayed in the throne. Moreover, Ladia might be able to go 1 step further and sit in the 2nd floor. Bear Grylls, 468 points, 14th place. Beckham, 472 points, 13th place. These were the 2 students from the London College. They also belonged to the 4th floor. They also sat on the 4th floor and maintained a safe position. Harry Chongrua, 687 points, 5th place. Just like in Berlin, the 3 contestants from London also guessed their results perfectly and chose the correct position. There was no risk of being eliminated. Abdul Muhammad's total score is 498 points, 11th place. Abdul Muhammad's total score is 658 points, 6th place. He didn't expect the 2 students in white robes to both score 9th or above. This meant that the 2 of them had also underestimated themselves. They could totally sit on the 4th and 3rd level. In the end, they were all sitting in the last row. In this way, the rankings of all the contestants sitting in the last row were all out. Among them, there were 2 people with high scores but low scores. This meant that at least 2 people above them would be eliminated because their scores did not match their positions. Ashma Muhammad, total score 32 points, 23rd place. Many viewers who were watching the live broadcast were shocked. Ashima, the Holy Maiden, only scored 32 points, which was equivalent to swapping places with the numbers. However, it was normal when one thought about it carefully. It was said that the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem spent about 10 hours a day praying to Allah. In addition, the Holy Maiden also needed to practice daily. Obviously, she did not have the time to study for the exam. Naturally, she could not score high. It was only natural that she came in last. I request to be replaced. But soon, Abdul Muhammad, who had scored 6th place, stood up and took the initiative to ask to be replaced by Ashima. Ashima accepted the replacement with a clear conscience, which caused a lot of boos in the stands. Because this way, Ashima would be ranked 6th, and Abdul, who had really scored 6th, would face the danger of being eliminated at any time. The flunkies were at the top, while the top students were on the verge of being eliminated. This naturally caused the audience to be dissatisfied. Jin Yujia, 799 points, 3rd place. Next was naturally Yu Zhang Academy's result. But what no one had expected was that Jin Yujia, the little girl who had been fooling around for the past 7 to 8 days, had actually achieved a good result of 3rd place. It really matched up with the seat on the 2nd level below her. She could rightfully sit in that seat, and not because Gu Han had randomly assigned her to sit there. Thinking of this, Jin Yujia could not help but cover her face with her hands and cry tears of joy. If one observed Jin Yujia's expression closely, one could see that Jin Yujia was actually sneaking glances at Gohan behind her, as if she had some secret deal with Gohan. Damn it! If it wasn't for the fact that I missed a paper, I would have scored 3rd place, sob sob sob. Leslie Dracula, who was sitting at the bottom of the row, almost burst into tears when she heard the result. This had always been a tragedy. But then again, there was a gap of 41 marks between Leslie Dracula and Jin Yujia. Was this really something that could be made up for with the marks of a paper? Bushwick, 480 points, 12th place. Menshevik, 430 points, 15th place. These two twins from Moscow were sitting on the 3rd floor, but their results were on the 4th floor. Obviously, both of them had been eliminated. It was worth mentioning that the brother of the twins was called Bushwick, and the sister was called Menshevik. The two of them had been loyal defenders of the Romanov dynasty for generations. P.S. These two names are very interesting. If you're interested, you can look them up. I won't go into details here. Ivan Andreevich Romanov, total score, 412 points, 15th place. My own twin siblings were eliminated, but Andreevich, my trump card, was lucky enough to stay on the 4th floor. At least the Moscow Academy, which was the 2nd place last year, was not eliminated. However, since Andreevich was the one who had chosen the seats for Bushwick and Menshevik, when he saw the siblings leaving the arena, Andreevich, a blond boy, felt deeply ashamed. Xiaobu, Xiaomeng, it's all my fault. I'm sorry. Why don't you use my seat? I'll switch places with you. The straightforward Moscow boy, Andreevich, took all the blame on himself and wanted to exchange his spot for the two siblings. Your Highness, please don't say that. We decided to sit on the 3rd floor a long time ago. We were too arrogant. It has nothing to do with you. After saying that, Bushwick and Menshevik left their seat. The twins, who had also performed brilliantly in the defense of the Great Invasion, had left the Elite 8 assembly before they could show their combat abilities. Sigh, I heard that this pair of twins are also powerful sword-bearers who have killed over 20 yuan yen. It's such a pity that they're leaving just like that. The clairaudient cameraman lamented. Brother, I have a question, but I'm not sure if I should ask it. He tapped on the shoulder of the clairaudient cameraman. Go ahead and ask. It's all my fault for meeting you. The clairaudient cameraman looked at the 2nd generation heir dotingly. Brother, why do I feel like we missed someone's result? The 2nd generation heir said shyly as he looked at the clairaudient cameraman. Yes, we did miss someone. The other cameraman immediately reacted. Why did Yuzhong City only announce one person's name? And where's the guy sitting on the throne at the top? Why didn't he announce his result? That's because he's in the top too. The clairaudient cameraman took a deep puff of his cigarette. I don't know which generation's committee came up with this idea, but in order to increase the viewership of the competition, they decided to announce the results of the top 2 at the end to increase the suspense. In the past, this kind of stupid setting wouldn't have increased the suspense, but this year, it's really full of suspense. This guy called Guhan, can he sit firmly in first place? The clairaudient cameraman seemed to be asking someone else, but also seemed to be asking himself. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.